Chapter 1541. Xia Guanying, who ranked first on the celestial map, and Chen Jibao, who left earlier than the 10,000 Shu soldiers who were summoned to quell the rebellion. Xia Guanying did not turn to look at the king of Jing'an, who had succeeded in inheriting the title like Su Fengnian. He laughed softly and said, "Without Lu Su's help, he is doing well." Xia Guanying joked, "Your Highness, you should give him some face. He admires you a lot. Furthermore, we still have to rely on this emperor of 10 years in the future. Without him, things will be much more troublesome." Chen Jibao looked towards the northwest. The bright white rainbow was becoming more and more majestic. Even the extraordinary king of Shu narrowed his eyes subconsciously. Before Xia Guanying noticed the clues and threw the stone into the bowl, in a large reed marsh at the east end of Bailu Lake, a small boat stood still and moved with the waves. On the bow of the boat, there was a bright red robe that spun quickly like a blooming peony. The red robe suddenly stopped. The joyful face looked towards the sky. Just as she was about to fly into the sky, the woman lying on the boat with her eyes closed said, "Don't worry about men's business." In the capital of West Chu, Chao Chongqing, who had rushed back to the imperial court from Bailu Lake to take charge of the military and political affairs, came to the wide white jade square outside the hall. His gaze followed the sword light from east to west. He sighed and said, "Lord Yansheng, this sword should have been waiting for me outside Tai and city, right?" Chao Chongqing said loudly, "Su Fengnian. Please help Li Chungang, Wang Xianji, Jian Zhouhuang, and all the people of Jianghu who have died in Jianghu. Teach the people in the imperial court what Jianghu is." The three Taoists walked along Guangling River to the east. When they could see the outline of Xiangfan City, the young Taoist in Wudang robe stopped. The little Taoist whose entire body was flowing with spiritual qi asked curiously, "Master, why aren't you moving?" The man with a sword on his back, who was wearing a Taoist robe from Longhu Mountain but mingling with the Wudang Taoists, frowned and said, "This sword is coming from Dongyua's sword pool to Wudang Mountain." Li Yufu, the current leader of Wudang's sect, who accompanied the carp to transform into a flood dragon in the river and into a dragon in the sea, nodded gently. He did not say anything, but there was a rare anger between his brows. Qi Xianxia, the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu, who came to look for the master and disciple of Wudang, praised, "This sword has no scabbard, the world is the sword's clothes. If I can face this sword head-on in this life, I will die without regrets." The little Taoist, Yu Fu, said softly, "Life and death, how important is that? Let's not die so easily." Qi Xianxia was speechless. She turned her head and stared at the little Taoist. She smiled knowingly and said, "You look like someone. When he was timid, he was even worse than a woman. When you're brave." Qi Xianxia didn't say that. When he was bold, even the immortals in the heavens were afraid. The donkey-riding middle-aged man, who had already passed Jiang'a and entered Shishu Dao, suddenly said angrily, "Li Yang, oh Li Yang, how can you play with this sword like this? Aren't you forcing me, Dong Tai, to go to Bailiang's border?" The young man who was pulling the box on the back of the donkey said with a sad face, "Master, can we not let our emotions affect our decisions? It wasn't easy for us to come to Shishu Dao from there. My calves and stomach have become thinner. In the end, we didn't see any scenery and we have to go beyond Bailiang's Great Wall." The peach blossom sword god, who had never meddled in Li Yang's court, rubbed his chin and said, "Li Yang has gone too far in this matter. It's not as simple as stabbing someone in the back, it's going to someone else's house and digging up the foundation of their house in front of them. Using the words we heard from someone 2 days ago, if the uncle can bear it, the aunt." The young man quickly cut him off and said, "The aunt can also bear it." Dong Tai bent down and rubbed the back of his old companion, the donkey. After thinking for a while, he said, "There's no rush. Master will first take you to see the scenery of Shishu. I have a feeling that in the future, no place in the world will be safe. Only this place will be more peaceful. If you can find a wife here, that would be for the best. When that time comes, Master will have nothing to worry about and can leave Shishu Dao alone." The young man laughed foolishly and said, "That's ridiculous. Dong Tai rolled his eyes and said, "You're just secretly happy." The young man suddenly said angrily, "Although I don't know what happened, if I were the king of Biyao, a great grandmaster, I would have already killed my way to Great Peace City and beat up that Emperor Liang." Dong Tai sighed and said, "So Su Fengnian is the king of Biyao, and you can only be my, Dong Tai's, useless disciple." The young man said angrily, "I'm really going to find a wife in Shishu Dao. When the time comes, I won't care about you anymore." Dong Tai turned his head and looked to the north. "Then hurry up." At the border between Beiliang's Lu Zhou and Beimang's Gusai Zhou, Tuoba Bodhisattva, who was discussing matters with a group of generals including Lu Gui, suddenly strode out of his tent. This king of the northern courtyard had a complicated expression. If he had known this would happen, would Su Fengnian have stayed at Huda's city and fought with him again? If he died like this, the history books would say that he was a northwest vassal king who died in battle at the border. He would not die for no reason and cause the door to the central plains to open. At the imperial astronomer of Great Peace City, without those Qi cultivators, the imperial astronomer of today was too quiet. A young man wearing a yellow dragon robe and a young man wearing the uniform of the imperial astronomer walked side by side. The emperor tried his best to speak calmly and asked, "Little bookshelf, how confident are you?" Under the sunlight, the young man raised his hand to cover his forehead and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, "I don't know about other things, but someone is unforgivable." The young emperor also smiled. "I'm clearly a formidable person, but my son wants to be a hero." "How funny." The young man suddenly became worried. "Brother Emperor, are you not afraid that he will completely side with Beimang?" The emperor asked. His father, Su Shao, has only done two things in his life. He used 20 years to conquer the Central Plains and another 20 years to resist Beimang. Do you think he dares to side with Beimang? Does he dare to let his father's efforts go down the drain? The young man said, "Oh." The emperor was extremely happy. He smiled and said, "Right, the Su Fengnian who doesn't want to be a loyal official but a filial son." Chapter 1542. In the summer town, Mr. Qi, who was as immovable as a mountain, stared at Chai Qingshan and said angrily, "Why didn't you stop Su Fengnian from leaving? Don't you know that the later Su Fengnian meets the sword, the more likely we are to succeed?" Qi Jiajie took a step forward and stretched out his hand. The long banners on the street rose into the air. He glanced at the girl with a single surname beside Chai Qingshan who was holding the book like it was a treasure and said angrily, "You just casually threw out a crude copy of the Greenwater Pavilion Sword Practice Manual. Do you, Chai Qingshan, still want the Dongyue sword pool to suppress the Wu family's sword tomb? Have you forgotten why your junior brother Song Nianqing died?" Chai Qingshan rubbed his disciple Shani's head and said with a smile, "Do you think I can stop Su Fengnian if he wants to leave?" Chai Qingshan shook his head and said, "If I join hands with you, the #1 swordsman in the north, and sacrifice our lives, we can delay Su Fengnian for a long time. In the end, the sword will reach Yuzhou, or even the foot of Wudong Mountain. But I don't think this will affect the outcome of the battle. The Dongyue sword pool and the Wu sword mound have been fighting for the title of the sword pool for hundreds of years, from the Dafeng dynasty to the current Liang dynasty. The disciples of the Dongyue sword pool have different levels of swordsmanship and different levels of swordsmanship. Have you ever heard of anyone who failed to honor the swords they forged?" Chai Qingshan sneered and said, "First, junior brother Song Nianqing died for the imperial court. Now, the sword pool forged a sword for you, Qi Jiajie. So I didn't even bring my sword on this trip. Someone needs to beg for food at the foot of the emperor, but I, Chai Qingshan, don't." "What? Not convinced? Come and hit me. Anyway, it's not the first time I don't like you and Master Lu Hao." Qi Jiajie was so angry that he lost his composure. Even the long spear trembled in the air. Even Song Tinglu and Shan Yi, the two disciples of the sword pool, had their horizons broadened. Master was usually a very serious old man. Why had he changed today? But the boy and girl liked it. This was the good master in their hearts. The girl in white with a sword on her back felt even more satisfied. Su Fengnian had thrown her the green water pavilion before he left. In her opinion, her master should have met such a person and drank 300 cups of wine together. Therefore, she made a face and shook her head to add fuel to the fire. What do you think? If you're not convinced, come and hit me. Come and hit me. Song Tingla turned his head and bared his teeth. Look, as long as that person was not around, his junior sister would reveal her fox tail. But he liked it from the bottom of his heart. The sword pool disciple was angry. The boy, the boy, the boy. The sword pool youth shouted, Master, he, Jiajia, the boy. The boy, he was. The sword. The sword, was shouted A's, he, the sword boy was to stare, S's, S-A, he. The boy was slapped on the head by his sister. Song Tinglu, you're his mother. Zhao Wenwei, whose face became thinner after meeting the girl, only dared to say in his heart, Miss, my name is Zhao Wenwei. I'm a scholar who aspires to be the most famous scholar in history. Qi Jiajia's eyes were fierce. Chai Qingshan had let go. He didn't pretend to be an elder in front of his disciple. He tilted his head and picked his ears. Qi Jiajia, if I remember correctly, you, the one flying the kite, still have to pay attention to the flying sword thousands of miles away. Don't let it go to waste. If you really want to fight with your life on the line, then wait until this matter is over. When the time comes, regardless of whether it is your swordsmanship or your state of mind, you will have benefited greatly after this trip. You will have a chance to reach the realm of Deng Tea's sea visit to the immortals. When the time comes, you and I will definitely die. Qi Jiajia suddenly closed his eyes and sensed the thread-like will of the sword. After he opened his eyes, he regained the otherworldly demeanor of Mr. Qi of Grand Peace City. He smiled and said, Chai Qingshan, you don't have to talk about the demeanor of a swordsman or the honor of Jianghu. You just don't think that the sword can achieve anything. Let me tell you a piece of news. Someone has secretly added a great aura to the sword that is enough to trigger the anomalies of the world. Chai Qingshan narrowed his eyes. Oh. Let's wait and see. Qi Jiajia smiled and waved his hand. The long tortoise and sword were nailed into the pillar of the inn. Han Xingxian was waiting for him in Shenwu City. Yang Taisui was waiting for him outside the Iron Gate. Huang Qing and the Bronze Man Grandmaster were waiting for him in Liuzhou. Diwu Raccoon went to Mount Bubang to find him. Wang Xianji went to Bailiang to find him. Tuoba Bodhisattva was looking for him in the western regions. This time, it was nothing more than a sword looking for Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian broke through the air on the spot. He summoned 2,400 sword wills of one qi and took the initiative to meet the sword. Su Fengnian stepped on a sword of qi. He floated in the wind. With the sword under his feet, he walked with the wind. Qi Jiajie was only a medicinal primer carefully prepared by the Liang imperial court. It was not difficult for Su Fengnian to kill him, whether or not Chai Qingshan of the Dongyue sword pool was there to stop him. Why did Qi Jiajie happen to arrive at Fuxia town almost at the same time as Wang Yuanran and the others? Otherwise, with the great reputation of Mr. Qi in the capital and the background of Yin Changeng and the others in the imperial court, how could there not be a few rooms on Mount Wudang for them to stay and rest? Qi Jiajie wanted to use the abundant sword aura that leaked out of the town of escape heat to force Su Fengnian to come down from the mountain and reveal himself. Then he would pretend to unsheath his long sword and have an ulterior motive in this competition. He wanted to bite Su Fengnian's unique qi to death, so that he could find a target for the 10,000 li coming from the east sword. Of course, Su Fengnian was not unfamiliar with this bold move. In fact, to be precise, he was the ancestor of this trick. Back then, when there was a great disparity in strength, he still insisted on killing the cat Han Xingxian. For this purpose, he planned carefully. First, he lent the sword to Sui Xiagu in Wuwu City. Then, he returned the sword to the outside of Shenwu City. Only then, he was lucky enough to kill the cat man who was known as the first person on earth below the immortals. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "An eye for an eye." It's not that you don't want to take revenge, it's just that it's not time yet. He stepped on the tip of his foot slightly and the tip of his sword slightly tilted. Then, the whole forest of swords soared into the sky and rushed into the thick clouds. When Su Fengnian broke through the clouds together with the swords, it was like a school of fish jumping out of the water. Above the sea of clouds, the rays of the sun shone brightly. The sunlight was so unscrupulous that it seemed to have draped the clouds with a graceful and magnificent golden coat. Heaven and earth were quiet and the atmosphere was peaceful. Only the swords were agile and wanton, leisurely wandering. The duck in the spring river knows when the water is warm, and the cicada is aware before the golden wind rises. The finger mystery state had the ability to predict the future. Therefore, when fighting against the enemy, they always had the advantage. The celestial state, the third realm of the first rank, got its name because of the resonance between man and heaven. Entering this realm was no different from the chi cultivators who were good at prying into the world's atmosphere, or even better. They had a keen intuition about the direction of the general trend, especially when it involved themselves. The highest land immortal among the first-rank 4 realms was known to travel the East Sea in the morning and arrive at the Great Desert in the evening. His wanton and unfettered behavior was worthy of the 4 words, wonderful beyond words. In today's world, who would dare to say that the good-for-nothing crown prince of the past was not a true immortal? The Wudang peaks behind Su Fengnian gradually faded away. He could clearly sense that the distant sword had just flown from Gangnam-do to Huainan-dao. A battle of life and death was destined to take place above the 9 heavens. But after all, there was still Huainan-dao between them, so Su Fengnian was still not in a hurry. Aside from the 2,400 swords, Su Fengnian stood on the flying sword with his hands behind his back like an immortal on stilts. He stared at the vast sea of clouds and sighed. He never thought that he would have such a day. It had always been Su Fengnian's childhood dream to be a hero who could walk on snow without leaving a trace and leap over roofs and vault over walls. In any case, his Su family already had the Su family saber that could make all heroes in the world bow their heads. Then he would carry his saber and roam Jianghu in Jianghu, eradicating evil, helping those in distress and helping those in distress, killing bandits to save women and children, killing rapists to save beautiful girls. On one hand, he was chivalrous and righteous, and on the other hand, he was acquainted with the heroes of Jianghu whose names shook the world, earning himself a nickname similar to Divine Saber Su Fengnian. At that time, the Jianghu of the Central Plains was quite popular to use the title Gongzi as a suffix. When he was young, His Royal Highness discussed with his eldest sister for a long time and very carefully listed out a large number of gongzi. For example, if he wore a white gown, he would use the title, Jade Tree Gongzi. If he wore a green gown, he would be called Azure Dragon Gongzi. He had long promised his younger brother Huang Man that he would help him snatch the world's most beautiful woman as his wife. It was a pity that second sister, who only liked to read history and military books, scoffed at this. But when the youth vowed that he would find a good wife, just like how Su Shao had found his mother in the Jianghu, second sister finally smiled. Second sister finally smiled. For the first time, she didn't mock her. His Royal Highness, who was lawless in Biyao, only heard later that there might be immortals in the world who could fly through the clouds like birds. One time, when he was bored, he went to bully a certain young girl who held a Shenglyph dagger in her sleep. He purposefully scared her, telling her that his body was so strange that even he was afraid of it, that he was a martial genius that only appeared once in 100 years. If he was willing to practice martial arts and the sword, he would be able to fly on his sword and defecate above Great Peace City in 15 minutes. With a thought, the swords moved. The dense swords around Su Fengnian spread out slightly, but the flying sword under his feet would be in front of a flying sword every 100 feet, and the swords would collide with each other. Su Fengnian smiled as he stepped out and stepped on the sword 10 zhang away. He repeated this, one sword for another, and started to run. Chapter 1543. A long, long time ago, when they had just settled down in Mount Qingliang, the eldest sister had not yet married off to the distant Jiangnan, the second sister had not yet had a wheelchair as a companion, and the younger brother had not yet been enlightened. The 4 innocent and happy children would randomly find an empty space, set up a grid, and jump around for an entire afternoon without tiring. When it was time to eat, the man who did not wear armor and thus only looked like a rich man would always call for the children under his wife's orders. His legs were slightly lame, and the man had a temperament of wanting to save face in front of his children. As a result, he would only laugh happily and watch them play. If it were not for his wife personally coming to catch them, the man would continue to watch, telling them to slow down and not fall. No one would ever know why, ever since he left Liaodong and Jinzhou, a man who had seen the magnificent scenery of northern Han, later Sui, western Shu, and so many other countries, would, in the end, patiently watch his 4 children perform the same routine over and over again. Yet, after his wife urged him to leave, he would feel reluctant to part. It was as if he hoped that his 4 children would always be this carefree, that they would not grow up, that the woman would not marry out of the family, and that the son would not take on any burdens. Perhaps no one would ever know that there was a young man, who was not a sword immortal of the land, who jumped around on a flying sword above the sea of clouds just because he thought of the happy times of his childhood. Su Fengnian finally stopped and lay down on his back. Beneath him, 100 flying swords instantly gathered and connected. Su Fengnian lay on a large bed of flying swords. He narrowed his eyes and gazed at the sky, the brilliant sunlight falling on his body. His golden body was resplendent. Not long ago, on an official road in Yuzhou near escaped summer town, the exhausted young woman could no longer endure the scorching sun. She told her companion that she wanted to rest for a while. Afterwards, she leaned against the trunk of a willow tree by the side of the road and took a nap. A bald little monk in a tattered kasaya squatted by the young woman's side. After she fell asleep, he gently waved his sleeve, fanning a gentle breeze. However, the little monk was a little worried. He noticed that she seemed to be having nightmares again. He frowned. It wasn't just this afternoon nap. In fact, ever since the 2 of them entered Bailiang's territory, she often had nightmares like this. She would wake up in the middle of the night from time to time. No matter how tired she was, she would refuse to close her eyes and sleep. I didn't take good care of Thingy. Thingy has suffered a lot. She hasn't bought any rouge for more than half a year. She doesn't even look at the shops. Thingy even deliberately said that she doesn't like rouge anymore. Master, while Thingy still likes rouge, please teach me. This time, I will study diligently and become a Buddha as soon as possible. The small monk suddenly heard a very familiar voice. This stupid disciple of yours. The little monk hurriedly raised his head with a face full of pleasant surprise. Then, he stretched out his finger and made a shushing sound, indicating that the newcomer should not disturb her. The little monk did not even bother to wipe away the tears on his face. The white-robed monk who had rushed over from Mount Wudang sighed in his heart. His daughter was right. She was a stupid girl. Li Xiaoxin slowly sat down on the ground. Abbot. The area within a radius of 10 feet immediately became cool. The white-robed monk closed his eyes and gently stretched out his hand to touch the space between his daughter's eyebrows. 3 years of Jianghu. It was the end of autumn. The Beimang army had gathered again. 400,000 elites were continuously pressing on Huayang Pass. A young monk broke through the clouds and landed outside the city like an immortal. He sat cross-legged. The young monk suddenly raised his head and said in a deep voice, "The world is so big. Please allow me to erect a benevolent monument in front of Beimang City." He closed his eyes and put his palms together. In fact, he did not say it out loud. No matter how big the world was, it was only the east, west, north, and south. The cavalry did not charge. Instead, they slowly held the line and then released thousands of arrows. The arrows were densely packed like a swarm of locusts. The entire sky was like a fragile piece of silk that was instantly torn apart by sharp weapons. The young monk lowered his head and chanted sutras, forming a golden body. As waves of arrows rained down, the monk's golden light began to waver and weaken. The arrow rain was endless. Scarlet blood began to gradually soak the kasaya. The lips of the young monk who was covered in blood trembled. He lowered his head and murmured, "Master, you have said that deep in love, do you regret it?" I don't understand the principles you said, but it doesn't matter. If I go west, I'll go. If I become a Buddha, I'll become a Buddha. For some reason, his scarlet body turned into a golden color in an instant. The monk, whose vision was blurred, turned his head with difficulty and looked at the city wall. His face was full of tears, but he grinned. He raised his hand and patted his ear, as if he was telling someone something. He turned his head and bent down slightly. He reached out and pushed the sand in front of his feet. It seemed that he was lifting something up for setting down something. He bent 2 fingers and gently knocked. Between heaven and earth. Suddenly, there was a clear and melodious sound of a wooden fish. Under the shade of the willow, the girl suddenly cried. After opening her eyes, she looked around blankly. When she saw that the stupid Nanbei was still there in that white robe, she did not know if she was still dreaming. She cried even harder. The little monk, who did not know what to do, pulled his master's sleeve and said in a hoarse voice, "Master, what's wrong with her?" The white-robed monk held his daughter in his arms and comforted her softly. Okay, silly girl, don't be afraid. Father and the stupid Nanbei are here." The white-robed monk reached out and wiped his daughter's forehead. She fell into a deep sleep. This time, she had no dreams and slept very soundly. Li Xiaoxin let his daughter continue to sit against the willow tree. After helping to wipe the tears on her cheeks, he touched his big bald head and turned to the little bald head beside him and said, "Nanbei, when she wakes up, take her to the Xiang Palace on Mount Wudong. Your master's wife is waiting for you there. She complains that the vegetarian dishes in the Taoist temple on the mountain have no oil and are not delicious. She misses your cooking very much. Remember to buy more chicken, duck, and fish at the small town at the foot of the mountain. When I come back, let's have a good meal together tonight." The little monk Nanbei said awkwardly, "I don't have money." "Master, do you?" The white-robed monk glared and said in a low voice, "When you reach Biyao, will the Su guy not provide food? At worst, you can go to that place called Escape Summer Town and tell them your names. Just say that you are my daughter and disciple." The little monk asked, "What if it doesn't work?" The white-robed monk said unhappily, "Then when you go up the mountain, go to the Su guy's thatched cottage and secretly pick a few cucumbers." The small monk rubbed his bald head and let out a sigh. The white-robed monk slowly got up and said, "Do as you see fit. I have to go and send that kid off. The 2 dynasties of Liang and Beimang have destroyed Buddhism. Only Beilang worships Buddhism. If this is intolerable, then I have no Zen. I have to recite Zen properly." The little monk said nervously, "Master, when you meet Su Fengnian, you must be polite. He is a good person." "Oh right, Master, you didn't bring the sharpened kitchen knife when you went down the mountain this time, right? If you did, I will need it to cook at night." "Master, you don't have to bring it." The white-robed monk waved his sleeves and jumped up. After reaching a height of several hundred feet, he walked towards the sky step by step. One step, one lotus. Li Xiaoxin said to himself, "Disciple, you can forget about becoming a Buddha. I'm good at this." On this day, the sky above Beilang was like a lotus pond suspended in the sky. After that, there were even Buddhas sitting on lotuses. In the sky nearly 100 miles away from the border of Hezhou, the white-robed monk caught up with the young lord who was flying east on his sword. Su Fengnian stopped the spectacular sword formation and asked, "Master, is there anything I can help you with?" The 2 were already above the sea of clouds, but the white-robed monk still pointed to a higher place. "You should know, right?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Of course. In addition to Qi Jiajia's sword and Xia Guaniying's interference, there will be some people who will not tolerate me. But don't worry, Master, it is all within my expectations. When there are too many lice, there is no need to be afraid of being bitten. When there are too many debts, there is no need to worry." Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the vast and unfathomable space and sneered, "If it was before the battle with Huang Qing, I would still be a little afraid. But now, it's nothing." The white-robed monk looked at the northwest lord who opened the door of Beilang to accept all the monks in the world, and said in a deep voice, I am not helping you, Su Fengnian. Of course, I can't help you much. But the pure land of Biyao is what my master, martial uncle, and that useless monk of Mount Lantua want to see. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment and finally said bluntly, Master, you should know that I am guarding the northwest and resisting Bei Meng's million-strong army out of selfishness. If I wasn't Su Zhao's son, if it wasn't for the fact that my northern Liang cavalry had taken root here for 20 years, their blood, sweat, and tears were all here, then I, Su Fengnian, might have at most single-handedly killed several dozen northern Mang generals and tried to kill Tuoba Bodhisattva. I definitely wouldn't have defended the border to the death in Liang province. As for accepting all the monks in the world, isn't it like being angry with Liang? The white-robed monk waved his hand impatiently. I don't care what you think. I only care about what you do and what you do. Su Fengnian laughed it off. The white-robed monk snorted and said, This sword is not simple. Don't die. My daughter and disciple have some debts with escaped Summer Town. They are waiting for you, Su Fengnian, to return them. Su Fengnian smiled and said, No problem. Su Fengnian turned around and continued to fly on his sword, heading straight for the border between Biyao and Huainan. The white-robed monk turned to face the west, but when he turned his head to look at the slightly lonely slender figure, he somewhat resembled himself when he went down the mountain from the two Zen temples and traveled thousands of miles to the west alone. The white-robed monk smiled. Not long ago on Mount Wudong, his wife said that it would be great if they had 2 daughters. At that time, he thought it was ridiculous, but now it seemed that it was not so ridiculous. The white-robed monk put his palms together and softly chanted the name of Buddha. Chapter 1544. Around the white-robed monk, lotuses as large as mountains bloomed one after another. The lotuses bathed in the dazzling sunlight rose above the sea of clouds. Thousands of lotuses rose in Biyao. The white-robed monk put his palms together and lowered his head, saying softly, When my heart is clear, when can I not see Tathagata? Where my heart is clear, where is not the western paradise? The white-robed monk slowly raised his head and said loudly, Lotuses fall in the Buddhist kingdom. On top of the lotuses, there were many Buddhas sitting on them. The Buddha's light shone down on the earth and covered the entire land of Biyao. Wudong's peaks were high and cold to the north. In the area northwest of Liang, only the Dansha Peak, Jiazi Peak, Goddess Peak, and the others, which originated from Hezhou, were adjacent to the other 6 peaks. It could be said that Wudong did not monopolize the beauty. When Su Fengnian drove the group of swords to the border of Yuzhou province, unlike the tranquil sea of clouds at the border of Yuzhou province, the scene in front of him was surging like a huge tide. The mountains of Hezhou province had sunk into the bottom of the sea of clouds. Only the most precipitous 6 peaks rose above the sea of clouds. However, only the sharp corners of the 6 peaks could be seen. The peaks of the 6 peaks were like piled-up stones in the river, which stood still despite the waves. Su Fengnian looked at the 6 islands in the distance. This was the place. If Xia Guinying did not make things worse, even if Su Fengnian allowed the flying sword to enter Yuzhou, he would still have a chance of winning if he stayed in the escape town. However, it was different now. Xia Guinying's intentions were far-reaching. Not only did he want the sword to break the fate of Chicken Soup Monk, he also wanted to break the fate of Su Fengnian and Biyao. If they fought at the foot of Wudong Mountain, even if Su Fengnian successfully received the sword, once the scattered sword aura escaped, it would still bring disaster to Biyao. In that case, he would still lose, and he could not afford to lose. If he wanted to fight, he could only fight outside of Biyao's border. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. He put 2 fingers together and pointed to the sky. He smiled and said, The first sword, the sword starts at the border. Apart from the flying sword under his feet, the 2,400 swords scattered in an instant. All of them had their swords pointed upwards and hovered in the sky above the border of Yuzhou province. Then, Su Fengnian retracted his fingers, bent his arms, and suddenly swung them outwards. Second sword, armored cavalry in formation. After dispersing, the 2,400 or so swords, which had originally appeared rather thin, actually grew from 1 sword to 100 swords in an instant. In the sky above the eastern border of Yuzhou province, a sword net seemed to have been set up. It was as if close to 300,000 Biyao cavalry were here in formation. After setting up this magnificent sword formation that had almost exhausted all of his spirit, Su Fengnian didn't just stand in the middle of the sword formation and quietly wait for the uninvited guest. Su Fengnian tightly pursed his lips. His eyes were resolute. If an outsider saw Su Fengnian for the first time, the first thing they would see would be his pair of red phoenix eyes. If they looked carefully, other than feeling that he had an outstanding appearance, they would also notice his slightly thin lips. It was inevitable that they would guess that such a person must have a cold temperament. Biyao has 300,000 border soldiers, and Biyao has millions of families living in poverty. Today, let me, the king of Biyao who feels guilty towards you, not feel so guilty. Su Fengnian raised his hand and rubbed his face hard. He said softly, Old Huang, Wenhua, the old man in the sheepskin fur coat, I'm very happy to have met you in this life. I don't need to apologize to the three of you, because I know you don't want to hear it at all. Su Fengnian lowered his head and smiled. Then let's go. Then let's go. Su Fengnian took in a deep breath, but didn't exhale. He took a step and rushed towards Dansha Peak where the sea of clouds was roiling. Su Fengnian's figure dropped rapidly. He stepped on the top of Dansha Peak and then shot up. After landing on the next peak, his figure leapt up again, constantly borrowing the power of this great mountain. Accompanied by the shocking rumbling of the rolling rocks, Su Fengnian, who had no more mountains to land on, opened his 5 fingers. His entire body collided with a dazzling white rainbow that cut through the sky. Yuzhou was 100 li away from the border. High up in the sky. When Su Fengnian's palm collided with the tip of the sword, the originally vast cloud of clouds exploded and completely dissipated. There were no clouds for 10,000 li. The sword that Su Fengnian's palm blocked was flowing with purplish gold light. It was actually 10 feet long, but as thin as a willow leaf. Therefore, this sheathless sword was all sword tip. It was the largest sword furnace in the Dongyue sword pool that had been sealed for nearly 200 years, the Dafeng sword furnace. It was said that the last emperor of the Dafeng dynasty had once thrown an heirloom imperial jade seal into the furnace. Therefore, the fate of the Dafeng sword furnace was preserved until today. The furnace was quietly opened at the end of the auspicious year of the Li Yang auspicious year. The furnace fire was so strong that it could be faintly seen from 10 li away. The Dongyue sword pool had no choice but to build 4 tall buildings that reached the clouds around the sword furnace. Qi cultivators of the supporting dragon sect waited outside the buildings to conceal the sword aura and fire. Su Fengnian was knocked back more than 10,000 feet by the collision of the sword. He was pushed back more than 2 li. Even Tuoba Bodhisattva's all-out attack, Dong Tai's all-out attack, or even Wang Xianji at her peak, would not have such power. Su Fengnian's mind was clear of distracting thoughts. All the qi in his body madly gathered at the point where his palm and the tip of the sword collided. Although the incomparably sharp tip of the sword had not yet pierced through Su Fengnian's palm, Su Fengnian was well aware that as long as there was a small opening, even if the opening was insignificant, it was very likely that he would be defeated like a landslide. Chapter 1545. The nameless sword, which had come from the Dongyue sword pool to the sky above River Province in a spurt of energy, seemed to have the intelligence of a human. After being enraged, its aura increased instead of decreasing. The sword qi swirled chaotically, illuminating Su Fengnian's purple-gold aura. The chilling sword light had solidified, whipping Su Fengnian's body. Ripples appeared on his robe that was flowing with aura energy. The sword swept past Dongyue Path, Guangling Path, Gangnam-do Path, and Huainan Path. One sword light chilled 19 provinces. At this moment, it had almost reached the peak. Its momentum was unstoppable. Su Fengnian pressed his palm against the sword tip. In order to weaken the terrifying momentum of the sword, he had no choice but to bend his knees slightly and lean his body forward. One man and one sword dragged a thick trail of smoke and mist in the sky. They passed Bo's Peak, Zishio Peak, and Old Man Peak. Su Fengnian's retreating figure passed 3 peaks in a row. He was less than 50 li away from the sword formation at the border of Yuzhou. Su Fengnian's robe was covered in hard frost. The aura that leaked out of his body was clearly not enough to disperse the frenzied sword intent. When Su Fengnian saw Goddess peek from the corner of his eye, he finally let out a breath. The sword tip pierced his palm instantly. Blood splattered. Su Fengnian used the sword tip as a fulcrum and leaned his body forward. His posture was like pushing a mountain with one hand and shaking Kunlun with his strength. They passed Goddess Peak, Jiazi Peak, and Dansha Peak. They passed 3 more mountains. The sword tip had completely pierced Su Fengnian's palm and slightly peeked out from the back of his hand. Su Fengnian was expressionless. He stretched out his left hand and placed it on the back of his right hand. The aura in Su Fengnian's body circulated for 800 li in an instant, surging like the tide of Guangling River. 2 palms, 1 horizontal and 1 vertical. Layered thunder. But in the short 3 li, the sword tip still peeked out from the back of Su Fengnian's left hand. The sword tip was only an inch long, but it had a lofty aura. Su Fengnian stomped his foot. Thunderous roars could be heard from the ground of River State. He allowed the tip of the sword to pierce his back another inch. The momentum of the sword finally paused. The scarlet blood flowed down the back of Su Fengnian's hand and into his sleeve, and then quickly condensed into a pool of blood frost. Although the forward momentum of the long sword had been forcibly stopped, it did not mean that the momentum of the sword had begun to decline. Almost every time Su Fengnian retreated 1 li, the tip of the sword would pierce through the back of Su Fengnian's second hand by half an inch. It was only 20 miles away from the border of Yuzhou province. The long sword began to draw an arc in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed downwards as it fell towards the land of Yuzhou. Su Fengnian leaned forward and gradually straightened his body. A traveler straightens his lapel when he is close to home. The tip of the long sword touched Su Fengnian's right chest. It was just a hair's breadth away from piercing through. The 20 or so flying swords behind Su Fengnian buzzed at the same time. After gathering together, they sounded like drums in the battlefield, resounding through the clouds. Bleeding from the 7 orifices? Su Fengnian was already bathed in blood. In particular, his face, which was not covered by the long robe, was constantly seeping blood. Before the dense sword energy could clear it, fresh blood would flow out. 10 li. The long sword had already pierced through his chest. Su Fengnian had maintained his posture from beginning to end with his palms pressed against the sword. He lowered his head to look at the sword. The blood obstructed his eyes, so his vision was somewhat blurry. Su Fengnian twitched the corner of his mouth and lightly spat out a mouthful of blood onto the sword. "I'm not having a good time, but aren't you also on the verge of collapse?" The long sword hummed, stirring up the flesh of Su Fengnian's wound. 5 li. The long sword of 1 zhang. 5 zhang was in front of Su Fengnian. The other 5 zhang was behind Su Fengnian. No one could imagine such a tragic scene. 3 li. The sword array was silent. Just like when the Northern Yang Steel Cavalry truly launched a charge to the death, there were no shouts from the other armies. The sword had already pierced through 7 zhang. Su Fengnian's lips moved slightly, but his words were unclear. When he was young, his mother said with a smile, "Xiaonian, you have to remember, the Su family is the gateway to the Central Plains." It had nothing to do with who the Liang Emperor was, and it had nothing to do with whether the people of the Central Plains scolded the Su family or not. The man who had never dared to talk back to the princess said boldly for the first time, "Xiaonian, don't take it seriously, don't take it seriously. War is not fun. Don't try to be a hero if you can. What's wrong with my son, Su Shao? Must he sacrifice his life for the country? There's no such thing." Su Fengnian just said to himself, "Mother, I'll listen to you, not my father." 2 li. Behind him were the barren mountains and rivers of Yuzhou. The long sword had already pierced through 8 zhang. It wanted to struggle mightily between the weakening and exhaustion of its momentum. Su Fengnian's palms clenched into fists. His palms were badly mangled and his bones could be seen. He tightly gripped the long sword, which was only 3 zhang sharp, and pulled it out. One Li Su Fengnian staggered backward, but his hands were tightly pressed against his chest, tightly gripping the tail of the long sword. He didn't want to let go. Half a Li Su Fengnian continued to hold the tail of the long sword with one hand, while his other hand went behind his back and gripped the tip of the sword that had pierced through his chest. Beiliang's million-strong army is pressing down, but Liangzhou's Huda city and Yozhou's Xiaoguang city are still there. As long as one person in the city is still alive, the city is still there. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. Beiliang was unwilling to fight to the death and retreat. Because we can't retreat. Su Fengnian didn't break the long sword with his bare hands. Instead, he broke the Wenzhong sword with brute force. After the sound of the long sword breaking, it seemed like a long period of time had passed. In the end, Su Fengnian bowed his head and stood to the east of the sword formation. He was only a few feet away from the solemn sword formation. Both of his hands were holding a broken sword. This 10,000 li sword could pass through the 4 paths and 19 provinces of Liang, but it couldn't take a single step into Beiliang. After the long sword was broken, the millions of strands of sword energy scattered in all directions. They were all blocked by the sword formation outside of Yuzhou. This summer, Great Peace City, where the sun was high in the sky, rained heavily. Sword Rain. Chapter 1546. When the white-robed monk transformed into a rainbow and arrived at the border of the Sea of Clouds, he saw the scarlet figure sitting cross-legged on the sword facing the east. Li Dongxin suddenly stopped. Like flowing water, he stood still in the sky like a landscape painting. The white-robed monk looked at the wind and clouds that had been caused by the sword formation breaking through the air. He said, "Of the remaining 120,000 flying swords, half of them will not reach Great Peace City. Beiliang has this poor monk to help you stop the immortals from taking advantage of the situation. Great Peace City is even more so. This is unnecessary. It is better to save your will and use it to strengthen your foundation." Su Fengnian still held the 2 pieces of the sword that had lost its sharpness but still had its edge. He said softly, "I could not control myself." "You are still young." The white-robed monk shook his head and said with a smile, "Put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you were the emperor of Liang and watched as the Jianghu people and scholars brought their fates into Beiliang, would you be able to endure it? Great Peace City's original intention was to use this sword to cut off your fate. But Xia Guining added fuel to the fire and it became a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. According to the thoughts of Qi Yanglong, Huan Wen, and Yin Mao Chun, even if they want you to die, they should wait until the Beimang army and the Beiliang cavalry are both heavily injured. If you die too early, it is not beneficial to the plan of Liang that Zhang Julu had planned. Su Fengnian raised his elbow and wiped the blood off his face. Xia Guining wants the world to be in chaos. He doesn't just want to gain fame from the Guangling battlefield, he also seems to want Qin Jibao to replace me as the king of the Northwest. That's right, as long as I die, the 3 fronts of Beiliang will be shaken. The closest one to Beiliang is Huainan Jidushi Kainan. Yan Wenluan probably won't let him enter Yuzhou, let alone holding the imperial edict to take over the command of the Beiliang frontier army. And the king of Shu Qin Jibao, who has a good reputation in Beiliang, is undoubtedly the best choice. Even if the Liang imperial court is unwilling, they can only agree. After all, with Qin Jibao in the northwest and monopolizing the power, it is better than Beiliang fighting on their own. In the end, Beimang will break through the border and encroach on the central plains. Of course, in this way, apart from the Beiliang cavalry, Qin Jibao also has Shishu and Nanzhao as strategic depth. This is equivalent to completing the best situation that my master, Li Shan, originally envisioned. To the Zhaosher of Liang, it is no different from a dove quenching its thirst. But there is no other way. Without this poisonous wine to quench their thirst, they will die even faster. The white-robed monk touched his bald head and said helplessly, "Just listening to it gives me a headache. You people of the imperial court, don't you feel tired?" Su Fengnian dismissed this with a smile. He turned his head and asked with a grin, "Zen master, have you received the east-west and north-south commands?" The white-robed monk made a sound of acknowledgement and then did not say anything else. Su Fengnian waited for a long time but did not hear anything. Finally, the white-robed monk turned his head and looked at the young man who was sitting on the sword in the air. He said slowly, "The sword under your butt is trembling. How long are you going to pretend to be a master? Do you really think you are an immortal who eats the clouds, drinks the dew, and drinks the wind?" Su Fengnian's face was extremely embarrassed. The white-robed monk lifted his sleeve and gently waved it. Su Fengnian turned around with his sword and rushed towards Mount Wudong. The white-robed monk flew beside him and said indifferently, "I am only sending you back to Wuxia town to help you pay back the money. Don't ask for a yard after getting an inch. You want me to help you scare Qi Jiajie and Chai Qingshan." Even if he didn't have energy to protect his body, there was still a cool breeze blowing gently, and he didn't feel the slightest bit of coldness when it brushed past his face. Even Su Fengnian exclaimed endlessly in his heart. This is a Buddhist sect divine ability that can form a small world of 10 feet in all directions. Was it Dong Tai's sword? Or was it the Confucian sage Chao Chongqing who had turned into a tyrant? Su Fengnian thought about it carefully and found that the chances were slim. Perhaps guessing Su Fengnian's thoughts, the white-robed monk laughed and said in a self-deprecating manner, "This penniless monk is only good at taking a beating. I can't compare to you, Su Fengnian, who was able to completely withstand that sword strike. If it were this penniless monk, although that sword strike could not harm this penniless monk at all, this penniless monk would definitely not be able to stop it from invading northern Liang. What, do you want to steal this Buddhist skill? I advise you to give up this idea, unless you are not king of Biyao and shave your head bald one day." Su Fengnian hurriedly shook his head gently and looked down. The culprit's sword that was placed on his leg had severely injured his physique. The injury looked frightening, but the hole in his chest had actually started to be mended by the moving red threads, showing signs of stopping the bleeding. Su Fengnian estimated that he would need to recuperate for about half a year before he could fully recover. During this period of time, he might not even be able to defeat a grandmaster like Qi Jiajie, let alone Tuoba Bodhisattva. However, compared to the damage to his own qi that was easy to disperse and difficult to gather, the situation was already much better. After all, his body could slowly recover, and his qi dynamic and divine will could also be like a pond that slowly stored water. There would be a day when it would be full. The amount of water in a pond and the width of the pond depended on the strength of a martial artist's body. The more obscure depth was related to the qi and tao of the void. After Huang Sanjie scattered the fate of the dynasty into Jianghu, Wang Xianji possessed both. Therefore, he dominated Martial Emperor City for 60 years. Tuoba Bodhisattva and Huyen Guanyin belonged to the former, and Xia Guanyin was the latter. The white-robed monk who could always accurately grasp Su Fengnian's thoughts looked at the Wudang peaks in the distance and sighed. From the perspective of a qi cultivator, fate is something that everyone has, but there is a great disparity. Emperors, kings, generals and ministers naturally have more than commoners. However, why is there a saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it? The simple words "the will of the people" have already revealed the secret of heaven. Heaven and earth are parents, just like a pair of strict father and loving mother. There are gods 3 feet above the head. Heaven's net is wide, but it does not escape. The earth produces 5 grains to nourish people, and a gentleman carries things with great virtue. When I was traveling to the west, Huang Longsher sent me off. When I returned, I was greeted by Huang Longsher. This person has always been mysterious. Once, he accidentally said that after flipping through the books, Su Fengnian was just a character who left because of fate, while Chen Jibao was the person who was born to slay both the dragon and the python. Therefore, you should have died in the battle at the border, leaving behind infamy in the annals of history for thousands of years. The white-robed monk probably knew that Su Fengnian was unable to speak frankly. He answered his own question. I have been staying in the 2 Zen temples for so many years. I often ask myself, why is there someone who can become a Buddha in this life, but not in the next life? Is it because those who become a Buddha will not become a Buddha? Buddhism has spread to the east, and when in Rome, do as the Romans do. The difference between Mahayana and Hinayana is becoming more and more obvious. I dare to say that there is an epiphany, and then put down the butcher's knife to become a Buddha. Sometimes, this penniless monk is also worried that this step might be a little too big. Actually, it is a good thing for Hinayana to abandon the world and pursue nirvana by oneself. It is even better for Mahayana to benefit the heavens, and to be merciful to others. Su Fengnian said with difficulty, "Isn't it still a headache?" The white-robed monk nodded, "That's right." As they approached Mount Wudong, the lotus tip turned into an island in the sea of clouds. The white-robed monk suddenly said, "In the future, you might go to Great Peace City twice, but that is only a possibility. Just treat it as me prattling on and pretending to be mysterious. Don't worry too much." Su Fengnian smiled, "I thought it would only be once." At this moment, strange movements appeared on the shoulders and sleeves of the white-robed monk's robes. It was as if hooks were tearing at the robes. Li Dongxin only waved his sleeves casually and patted his shoulders. Su Fengnian's expression was solemn. He subconsciously reached out to grab the broken sword on his knees. Immortals sat high in the 9 heavens, fishing with their rods. Those fishing lines that even chi cultivators could not see fell into the mortal world. At this moment, many of the hooks happened to hook onto the white-robed monk. The white-robed monk shook his head and smiled, "Don't worry. As a member of the 3 religions, it is more troublesome." Su Fengnian could not help but curse inwardly. How could he not care? Anyone would not be able to keep their cool when the immortals who were fishing for luck in the heavens were tearing at their clothes like this. However, Zen Master, you are patting here and there like you are swatting flies. I can only follow you and not care. Su Fengnian smiled for no reason, "Zen Master, you are making such a big commotion before the fight. Han Gui of Green Mountain Monastery is under a lot of pressure." The white-robed monk chuckled, "This is what my daughter taught me. She said that when the Jianghu people at the foot of the mountain fight, before their fists hit their opponents, they would first perform a set of majestic fist stances on the spot. Not only can it boost their courage, it can also earn the cheers of others." Su Fengnian forced a smile and laughed, "You are indeed an experienced Jianghu person." Near the summer escape town at the foot of Mount Wudong, the white-robed monk gently pushed Su Fengnian down on his sword. A voice came from behind, "Change your clothes before you see the thing. Otherwise, if she knows that you are in such a miserable state under my watch, I will be nagged for a long time. My ears will not be able to have peace. You have to know that my daughter's lion's roar of Buddhism is 80% inherited from her mother." After hearing this, Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. In the blink of an eye, he landed in the sky above the summer escape town. He stood up and the flying sword of will dissipated by itself. Su Fengnian held the 2 pieces of the broken sword in his left hand. After he pulled out Qi Jiajia's long sword, he was more seriously injured than he was. His body was not bad, but his heart of the sword was almost destroyed. In this lifetime, he would not be able to make a breakthrough in the realm of the sword. Therefore, Su Fengnian really had to be wary of Chai Qingshan, who had chosen to stand aside for some reason. Chapter 1547. When Su Fengnian's feet landed on the street, without the protection of the white-robed monk's 10 feet of pure land, a mouthful of blood surged up to his throat. He forced himself to swallow it back down. In fact, it had only been an hour since Su Fengnian left on his sword. The situation in the town had already stabilized. Under the suppression of Luo Hongcai's 500 horsemen and Sui Tiashan's men of sacrifice from the whisk room, the injured Wang Yuanran and the others had been detained. Qi Jiajia had also let Yin Changgang and the other nobles return to the inn. He stood on the street with Li Yibai and Chai Qingshan. Soldiers continued to arrive from both inside and outside the town. Even the most senior member of Wudang Mountain, Yu Xingrui, had come to the edge of the town and stood on a mud wall. Although he had not entered the town to confront the 2 sword masters, the Wudang Taoist, who was the only one who cultivated strength among the 6 brothers, was obviously here to block their retreat. When the 2 children, Song Tinglu and Shan Yi, saw Su Fengnian covered in blood, they were dumbstruck. After learning the general inside story from their master and Qi Jiajia's conversation, the boy was shocked that this person surnamed Su could actually withstand the sword. The girl in white, on the other hand, was in a completely different state of mind. She almost felt that her heart was about to break. Her beautiful eyes overflowing with spiritual qi were vaguely teary. Her knuckles were white as she tightly clutched the record of sword practice of Qingshui Pavilion. Su Fengnian waved his hand at Luo Hongkai and Sui Taizhan, indicating that they could withdraw from the town. The 500 horsemen and 70 Jin horsemen retreated like the tide. The men of sacrifice and archers on the roof also withdrew. It was done in one breath and without a sound. Precisely because of this silence, the momentum became more powerful. It especially shocked Chai Qingshan, who had been the chief guest of the spring snow building for more than 10 years. Guangling Dao could be said to have a strong military force, but among so many elite troops, only the troops trained by Hengjiang General Song Li could be compared to the troops stationed in Biyao, except for the Lord's personal guards. Su Fengnian did not see the east and west girls and the north and south little monks. They should have started to climb the mountain after shopping. Su Fengnian said to Qi Jiajie and Chai Qingshan, "Shall we go into the inn and talk?" Chai Qingshan smiled and said, "Why not?" Qi Jiaj, who had a long saber hanging from his waist, remained silent. Song Tingla was about to sit down, but Li Bai's collar and Chai Qingshan's and Qi's Qi Jiajie took their seats one after another. Chai Qingshan and Qi followed. Chai Qingshan and Chai Qi followed, Chai and Chai Qingshan and of Qi and of the room of, he. Chai. Of Li of, sky of heaven, s, and walked, alone, of heaven of time, and asked, of. His, of. Su Fengnian gently put the two pieces of the sword on the table. One of them was longer than the table, while the other was as short as a dagger. He smiled and said, "Young Master Yin, please sit down. Prisoners on death row can still eat their last meal." Yin Changging's face stiffened. When he saw the wound on Su Fengnian's chest that was bleeding the most, he quickly sat down and lowered his eyes. Qi Jiajie sat upright and still with his eyes closed. Chai Qingshan studied the two pieces of the sword with great interest. Although the sword came from the Dongyue sword pool's Dafeng sword furnace, except for the group of old swordsmiths in the sect, even he, the sect master, did not take a look at it. Before it was formed, the sword was like a girl waiting to be married, but it was already famous. Chai Qingshan, who was in the sword pool, felt its sword aura the most. But it was a pity that such a peerless sword, which had never been seen before and would never be seen again, died as soon as it was married. At the moment, the only thing left of the broken sword was its sharpness. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to speak. The atmosphere in the inn was solemn. At this moment, the girl with the sword on her back who did not follow her master into the inn ran in with a pile of clothes, shoes, and socks that she had just bought. In fact, it could not be said that she had bought them, as the shop had closed long ago. She had kicked the door open, picked out the clothes, and threw down a bag of silver. Shan Yi said timidly, "King of Baliang, you gave me a secret manual, and I'll give you a set of clothes in return. Is that okay?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If it's a business deal, I'll lose a lot. But if it's a favor, then it doesn't matter. Miss Shan, just put the clothes on the table. I'll change them before I climb the mountain." Song Tingla stood on her tiptoes with an anxious expression and whispered in the ear of her slender senior brother, "Li Bai, senior brother, what should we do? With junior sister like this, is she going to stay in Baliang and not return to our sword pool?" Su Fengnian ignored the youth's worries and said straightforwardly to Qi Jiajie, "If this sword is successful, you will improve the path of the sword, and the imperial court will be reassured. In reality, I admire you. Everyone says that the sky is high and the emperor is far away. But you have schemed to do this. You really think highly of me, a person who is no longer in the Jianghu. Someone has done something to the sword. You already know, Qi Jiajie. I won't beat around the bush with you. You, Qi Jiajie, scram back to Great Peace City today. You are not allowed to use the sword for 10 years. Also, help me send a message to your master. I will find a chance to talk with him, just like we are now. Qi Jiajie suddenly opened his eyes. What, you have no intention of talking? Su Fengnian, who had been using his sleeves to cover his hands, slowly raised his arm, bent 2 fingers, and tapped on the extremely long broken sword. It was too much for the eyes to take in. At the same time, Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, breaking a willow and sending people away is not just a custom of the Central Plains. Biyao has it as well. But Biyao is not like you. Once people leave here, many people will not be able to come back. I wonder if you, Qi Jiajie, will do as the Romans do when you arrive in Biyao? The broken sword, more than 1 zhang long, was broken into dozens of pieces. The pieces of the broken sword rose into the air and spun lightly on the table like willow leaves leaving the branches and moving with the wind. Qi Jiajie snorted coldly. He seemed to be venting his anger, but everyone present knew that this was Mr. Qi showing weakness. The willow leaf slowly fell back to the table. Yin Chang'eng, whose heart had been in his throat, seemed to be relieved of a great burden. Sweat had seeped out of the young master's forehead. But in the next moment, Yin Chang'eng felt a cool breeze in his face. Then he was knocked back and fell to the ground with his chair. The entire table had been split in half. Chai Qingshan turned his head and saw Su Fengnian had one hand around Qi Jiajie's neck. This Mr. Qi's back was pressed against the wall of the inn, his feet off the ground. The long saber at Qi Jiajie's waist was only half out of its scabbard. Su Fengnian had one hand around Qi Jiajie's neck, one hand behind his back. He raised his head to look at the best swordsman of the capital whose energy had exploded. He said with a smile, under the precondition of receiving the same level of injury, "It is not as hard to kill you, Qi Jiajie, as you think. It is impolite not to reciprocate. Later, I will have Mr. Yin, who definitely hates you, take your head back to Great Peace City." As the sword master's energy quickly weakened, the long saber slowly slid back into its scabbard. Chai Qingshan, who was thinking quickly, did not move in the end. He sighed in his heart. This young man was really ruthless to the enemy and even more ruthless to himself. In order to kill Qi Jiajie, this young vassal king looked so relaxed, but the blood on his body that had just shown signs of drying would probably add another 7 or 8 tails of blood. Su Fengnian let go of his hand. The already dead Qi Jiajie sat limply against the wall. The man and woman on the second floor, Zhao Chenyuan and Gao Shiqing, both covered their mouths, not daring to let themselves cry out. Gao Shilian and Han Xingyan both gasped. For the first time, the young Zhao Wenwei paid attention to this vassal king of Liyang who did not listen to orders, instead of paying more attention to the white-clothed girl Shan Bai. Different from the shock and fear of his brothers and sisters, this young man who had only read frontier poems in books did not panic. Instead, the young man looked down at everyone's reaction. The seemingly expressionless swordsman Chai Qingshan, whose left hand tightly gripped the chair's handle. Yin Chang'eng, whose hands were slightly trembling, re-straightened the chair. He hesitated for a moment before sitting down, and the young vassal king who slowly sat back down with a smile on his face. At that moment, Zhao Wenwei, who had admired his brother-in-law Yin Chang'eng since childhood, began to change his mind rapidly. The secret words that he did not listen to before, no matter what his father said, suddenly became clear to him. Especially the sentence, "Wenwei, that Yin Chang'eng is just a prime minister in peaceful times. He can't be the chief secretary in troubled times. It may not be a blessing for our Zhao family to have such a son-in-law." Su Fengnian smiled at Chai Qingshan and said, "Mr. Chai, I was surprised that you could hold back and not make a move." Chai Qingshan replied, "Your Highness couldn't hold back and made a move." This commoner was even more surprised. Su Fengnian, whose body reeked of blood, glanced at Chai Qingshan's 2 disciples and said, "Mr. Chai has taken in 2 good disciples. There is hope for Dongyue's sword pool to rise again." Although Song Tingler regarded this elegant but ruthless vassal king as a great enemy, he still couldn't help but straighten his back when he heard these words. Nonsense, being praised by one of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts evaluation, if this spread to Jianghu, he, Song Tingler, would become famous overnight. In the future, when he left the sect to travel Jianghu, wouldn't he easily have friends all over the world? Chai Qingshan laughed heartily and said, "Then I will take advantage of your highness' auspicious words." Su Fengnian smiled at the young Song Tinglu and said, "I heard that you want to be the second when bushing to become famous in the capital. There are dozens of willow leaf flying swords on the table. I will give them to you. Do you dare to accept them?" The young man raised his chin and said, "Why wouldn't I dare?" Chai Qingshan sighed helplessly. This troublemaker. These things were really troublesome to deal with. Su Fengnian really did put away the broken swords on the table. He stood up and said, "Young Master Yin, I will have to trouble you to take me to Qi Jiao's room. I will change my clothes so that I can go up the mountain." The white-clothed girl looked at Su Fengnian's bloody hands and hurriedly picked up the clothes and said, "I will help my highness bring them upstairs." Chapter 1548. Chai Qingshan felt even more helpless. Damned girl, did she want the entire world to think that Sword Pool had something going on with Biyao? Yin Changing took Su Fengnian up the stairs, the young girl following closely behind. His companions at the stairs had already retreated to their rooms. Song Tingla rested his head on the table and laughed foolishly. Li Bai teased, "With a new sword, you don't have to worry about your shimmy." The youth stared at the willow leaf swords that he liked the more he looked at them. He twisted his mouth and said, "In any case, I can't win against Su Fengnian. I'll just leave it to fate." Chai Qingshan slapped the back of his disciple's head. "Look at you." Stopping at the end of the corridor on the second floor, Yin Changing said softly, "This is Mr. Qi's room." Without waiting for Su Fengnian to act, the young girl in white cleverly pushed open the door like a servant girl. Su Fengnian stood at the door and said to Yin Changing, "If you have the guts, when you return to Great Peace City, tell Yin Mao Chun that the king of Shu, Chen Jibao, has Xia Guining supporting him and is like a tiger that has grown wings. Once he establishes his authority in Guangling Road, this person's threat to the court will not be below mine, Su Fengnian. Of course, whether you say it or not is up to you, Yin Changing. Also, I can't force it." Yin Changing seemed to have made a decision with great difficulty. He suddenly said in a low voice, "Wang Yi, can I come in for a chat?" Su Fengnian stilled and then smiled. "No matter." The young girl with a sword on her back, her face slightly red, was busy. Not only did she put down the clothes, she even put the sword on her back on the table. She did not treat him as an outsider at all. At this time, she was carrying a wooden basin out. She saw Yin Changing walk in. After her shock, she did not ask anything. She only said to Su Fengnian shyly, "Wang Yi, I will go boil a basin of hot water for you. Wang Yi may have to wait a while." Su Fengnian joked, Go. But this time, I have nothing to give you." The young girl lowered her head and walked out of the house in small steps. When she reached the corridor, she began to jump up and down. With the girl's interruption, Yin Changing's mood calmed down a bit. He closed the door and sat down after Su Fengnian. Yin Changing did not take advantage of the situation to sit down. He just stood there. Just as he was about to speak, he found that Su Fengnian covered his mouth with his hand. Shocking blood flowed out from between his fingers, especially the large pool of blood on his chest. Yin Changing could not help but wonder, even if he was a martial arts great master, was it really okay to bleed so much? Su Fengnian's throat moved slightly. After he put down his hand, he took a deep breath and said with a smile, "Although your Mr. Qi didn't draw his sword before he died, the 18 strands of sword qi that he gave me are raging in my heart. I have no choice but to ask you to make it short." Yin Changing did his best to not smell the pungent smell of blood. He quickly thought of the right words and said, "Has your highness heard that Tantanon has the intention of giving up the position of provincial master?" Out of the corner of his eye, Yin Changing saw Su Fengnian reach out a hand and press it against his abdomen. His 5 fingers were curved in a mysterious way, as if he was suppressing those sword qi. Su Fengnian's expression was amused. He nodded and said, "I've heard. Your father and father-in-law both have a chance of taking over this position. Can this be considered keeping the goodies within the family?" Yin Changing shook his head and said in a heavy voice, "Zhao Yuling has always looked down on me. Part of this is because Zhao Yuling has great expectations for his youngest son, Zhao Wenwei. In reality, Your Highness should be well aware that back then, my father was the first to leave Zhonglu, even earlier than Zhao Yuling, Yuangua, Han Lin, and the others. It was precisely because he had a disagreement with the old Grand Secretary on the matter of Biyao. Su Fengnian smiled and interrupted him. There was a disagreement, but don't be in such a hurry to throw dirty water on Zhongjulu. Back then, Yin Chang'an was the first to leave Zhonglu. His disagreement with Biyang's politics was only a small part of the reason. Most of it was the late emperor's intention. The late emperor needed to cultivate someone who could succeed Gu Lu and contend against Zhang Lu as a civil official. Unfortunately, the Green Party was disappointing, and the scholarly clique in Gangnam-do even more unbearable. Yin Chang'an tried twice in secret to rope them in, but he failed. That was why he had no choice but to stay in this corner of Hanlin Academy. Not only was the late emperor greatly disappointed, the one who should be even more disappointed should be Yuan Benshi. As a result, Yin Chang'an couldn't continue. As he spoke, Su Fengnian coughed from time to time. He continued, as expected, scholars are naturally not suited to discussing business face to face, but they do have a set of schemes behind the scenes. Fine, if you can't say it, I'll say it for you. Although your father and Zhao Yuling are relatives by marriage, they've never seen eye to eye. If I'm not wrong, your father's true best friend, the one he's willing to see as a kindred spirit, is only Han Lin, who's about to become the administrator of the Huainan Dao, right? What, you want me, Biyao, to take care of the ambitious Sir Han? And what will your return be? Yin Chang'an suddenly felt somewhat lacking in confidence. He said softly, after Sir Han takes up his post in the Huainan Dao, he will immediately propose to the court that the administrator's mansion be moved to the border between Ji and Hezhou. Su Fengnian nodded. I understand. Yin Chang'an breathed a sigh of relief. If he continued to speak, there were some things that only the heavens and earth would know. It was truly too difficult to say. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Fine, you can return to Great Peace City at ease. As for the Huainan Dao and Jizhou, on the way back, tell that administrator to be at ease. Yin Chang'an wanted to speak, but hesitated. Su Fengnian laughed coldly. As for what should be done, Biyao will naturally weigh the pros and cons. In short, we won't make things difficult for your father and Han Lin. In this transaction, your side will definitely be more profitable. Yin Chang'an bowed with clasped hands. Then Yin Chang'an will quietly wait for the good news. When Yin Chang'an quietly left the room, he discovered that the girl from the sword pool holding a basin of hot water was standing not too far away. Chapter 1549. Of course, Su Fengnian did not have the face to let a girl serve him. When he closed the door and took off his robe alone, he was somewhat puzzled. Why was it that the older he got, the thinner his skin became? After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Su Fengnian, who had finished bandaging his wound, opened the door again. The girl blinked her big eyes and did not speak. Su Fengnian rubbed her head and said softly, "Little girl, thank you. If you can wait until Biyao is not at war, then you can come here to travel Jianghu." The scenery outside the Great Pass, although it is not as lush as the trees in Jiangnan of the Central Plains, is also very beautiful. The girl's eyes were somewhat resentful. The way he rubbed her hair was too much like a kind elder. Su Fengnian suddenly clasped his fist and smiled. He imitated the children of Jianghu and said loudly, "The green mountains do not change, the green water flows forever. We will meet again someday." The white-clothed girl was startled, and then she couldn't stop laughing. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide it, and she couldn't be reserved. Su Fengnian left in large strides. When he reached the outside of the restaurant, Luo Hongkai was already waiting at the door with his horse. Beside him stood the Imperial Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda, whose hands and feet were bound. There was also the Imperial Cavalry Commander Tao Nyocha, who had returned from Liangzhou to take up his post within the borders after being injured. Su Fengnian took the reins and looked at the platoon leader Tao, who had internal injuries and a pale face, before getting on the horse. He gave him a thumbs up. The young king rode away, leaving behind a trail of dust. Luo Hongkai gently kicked Fan Xiangda. Before he got on the horse, he heavily patted Tao Chei's shoulder and laughed. "Good job, this time you have made me proud." Tao Chei, who was almost slapped to the ground, smiled foolishly. Jin Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda was unhappy. Tao Chei turned his head and said, "Commandant Fan, pinch me. I am afraid I am dreaming." Fan Xiangda was amused and laughed. "Dreaming in broad daylight." Tao Chei said heroically, "Commandant Fan, today I will invite you and your brothers to drink wine together. There will be enough." Fan Xiangda was surprised and said, "With that little money of yours, you even send it to your family. Can it be enough?" Pottery Ox Cart chuckled and said, "Don't you have Commandant Fan to cushion it?" Fan Xiangda stared blankly for a moment before sneakily putting his arm around the corporal's shoulder. "Old brother Tao, let's discuss something. In any case, it's just the two of us and Field Officer Luo today." Field Officer Luo went to Wudang Mountain with His Highness. "Let's drink tonight. Why don't you tell your brothers that His Highness gave us a thumbs up?" Tao Nyocha said in all seriousness, "Commandant Fan, borrowing money is borrowing money. It's not like I won't return it. I, Tao Nyocha, am an honest man." Fan Xiangda sighed. Tao Ox Cart lowered his voice and said, "If you borrow money and don't collect interest, then it's done. What do you think?" Fan Xiangda laughed and said, "No problem. Tomorrow I will treat you to another round of wine." In order to take care of Tao Nyocha, the two of them did not ride horses. The commandant and corporal walked side by side through the escaped summer town. Tao Nyocha's eyes suddenly became absent-minded and he said softly, "I am one of the last group of crossbowmen that governor who brought out. It's a bit late. Us field officers like to brag that they've seen the great general with their own eyes. During those years outside the pass, I was so envious. Commandant Fan, after His Highness leads us to defeat the Beimang barbarians, can we also tell the younger guys that we've seen His Highness with our own eyes back in the day? He's only 2 or 3 steps away." Fan Xiangda nodded and said in a low voice, "There will be such a day." When Su Fengnian and Luo Hongkai went up the mountain, Yu Xingrui was also there. Su Fengnian asked the old Taoist for an elixir and asked Luo Hongkai to give it to the Imperial Cavalry Corporal. It was not his idea. When Su Fengnian came to the front of the hut, Zhao Ningxian was sitting on a small stool. There was an empty stool next to him, and Mr. White Lotus was helping Su Fengnian move books to dry them. After Su Fengnian sat down, Zhao Ningxian, who was also a Taoist master of Mount Longhu like his uncle Zhao Danping, said flatly, "If His Highness wants to punish me, I will not fight back." Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Not fight back? What can you do even if you fight back?" Zhao Ningxian looked into the distance and said, "I am willing to cultivate on Mount Wudang for 10 years. Su Fengnian glanced at the busy Mr. White Lotus and said with a smile, "What? In order to let Mr. White Lotus go down the mountain safely, you are willing to give up the reputation of the Taoist master mansion?" Biyao slowly got up, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and walked to Su Fengnian. He squatted beside the two and looked at the king of Biyao with squinted eyes. He said with a smile, "My Highness, let Zhao Ningxian go and I will stay. How about it?" Su Fengnian smiled. This Mr. White Lotus was obviously more tactful than Qi Jiajia and even Yin Chang'an. Biyao stretched out a finger. "But I can only stay in Beilyang for 1 year. I will do my best in this 1 year." Su Fengnian stretched out a hand. 5 years. Mr. White Lotus shook his head. "That is unreasonable. 1.5 years. 1.5 years at most." Su Fengnian sneered. 4 years. Just 4 years. I will give you face. Don't say 1 year less. 1 day less and there is no room for negotiation." Mr. White Lotus still shook his head. 4 years? The Central Plains will be too late. Besides, Beilyang doesn't need me to stay for 4 years. My Highness is a sensible man. 1.5 years is enough. The world is set. Su Fengnian withdrew 2 fingers. 3 years. If you bargain again, I will beat you. Oh, no, I mean Zhao Ningxin. Biyao suddenly sat down on the ground. Then you can beat him. I can't help you anyway. I can just watch the show. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, and finally said, for Zhao Zhu's sake, 2 years. If you talk nonsense again, I will beat you too. It was unknown where this scholar got the strength from, but he stood up with lightning speed. His figure was very vigorous. Mr. White Lotus bowed and said, 2 years it is. Su Fengnian quickly got up and helped Mr. White Lotus up. He said with a smile, Mr. White Lotus, are you still not used to our Beiliang? And when will you go to Mount Qingliang? Zhao Ningxin looked at the two with a blank face. Chapter 1550. All good things must come to an end. In the end, Zhao Ningxin was persuaded by Biyao to leave the mountain. Biyao's eyes weren't good, so he didn't send him off. Before leaving, Biyao told Zhao Ningxin that he might as well go to the Earth Lung Mountain where the evil dragon was killed and live in seclusion. He also told Zhao Ningxin not to involve the Dragon Tiger Mountain in the waves. Great Peace City had Prime Minister Zhao Danping to support the Taoist master residents, so Liang wouldn't make things too difficult for the Taoist master residents. Zhao Ningxin was worried. Clearly, he was worried about Mr. White Lotus becoming a hostage in Beiliang. Biyao didn't care. He comforted him and said that Su Fengnian and Beiliang might not even be able to cross the river. It was too early to burn the bridge. After Zhao Ningxin left the mountain alone, Su Fengnian, who had to change into a clean set of clothes, appeared beside Biyao. Zhao Ningxin going to the number 1 blessed land of Taoism, Earth Lung Mountain, to cultivate was a private deal between him and Biyao. Dragon Tiger Mountain had schemed against the Su family 3 times. The first time was under the old locust tree in the capital to steal the fate. The second time was when the old Taoist master who was like a child came personally to kill Su Fengnian. This time, Zhao Ningxin didn't hesitate to use his life golden lotus to guide the flying sword. How could Su Fengnian just let Biyao stay in Beiliang to manage the government affairs with a smile? If it wasn't for the sake of Huang Man, er's master Zhao Shituan, even if Su Fengnian let Zhao Ningxin leave Beiliang, he would definitely make this noble with the same surname as the country suffer. Biyao lowered his head to look at the mountain path. With his poor eyesight, he couldn't see Zhao Ningxin's figure clearly. He said softly, according to what the Lord said, Earth Lung Mountain is not only a blessed land of Taoism, but also the place where the Zhao family of Liang suppressed the rivers and mountains in the south. Zhao Huangchao, who lived in seclusion in Dragon Tiger Mountain, failed. First, the Black Dragon was injured by the Wudang leader Li Yufu. Then, even Zhao Huangchao himself was killed by the Lord. Then Zhao Ningxin quietly entering the Earth Lung Mountain, which is still sealed by the imperial court, is tantamount to stealing from the Liang royal family. This matter, if it was someone else, they really couldn't do it. Only Zhao Ningxin was the most suitable. Firstly, his surname is Zhao and he has the advantage of being close to the water pavilion. Secondly, Zhao Ningxin is a person who carries the fate of a sect. Furthermore, now that the Qi cultivators of the Liang North sect are almost all dead, and the last bit of vitality was used to forge the sword in the Dongyue sword pool. When Mr. Biyao came down the mountain for the first time, it was not to have an audience with the current emperor, but to have a private meeting with the crown prince of Nanjiang, Zhao Zhu. Seeing the flood dragon but not the dragon, isn't it because you want to create the merit of supporting the dragon and become a minister who follows the dragon? Mr. White Lotus smiled and said, but now, I have no choice but to be trapped in northern Liang for 2 whole years. Even if I succeed by a fluke, the merit of raising the flood dragon into a dragon will inevitably be greatly reduced. Does the Lord not have anything to say? Su Fengnian turned his head and said playfully, Mister's words are not kind. Right now, Zhao Zhu is being held back by the number 1 general of the southern border, Wu Zhongshuan. The troops that he can barely mobilize are the 2,000 to 3,000 that went up north to quell the rebellion. Most of them were borrowed from Wu Zhongshuan. Right now, Mr. is staying by Zhao Zhu's side. Even the cleverest housewife cannot cook without rice. Other than staring at the crown prince of Yan Qi, what else can you do? It's better to go at the right time than early. I'm thinking for Mister's sake, When Mr. has accumulated enough prestige in northern Liang, Zhao Zhu will let Mr. take charge of a department. When the conditions are right, success will follow naturally. Biyao smiled bitterly. In that case, I have to thank the Lord for his good intentions. Su Fengnian said with a smile, we'll be under the same roof for the next 2 years. It's tacky to say thanks. When the two returned to the thatched hut, Biyao took the initiative to speak. Prince, please tell me about the situation in northern Liang. I'm kind enough to know what's going on. Otherwise, if I go to Deputy Administrator Song of Mount Qingliang, I'll be in the dark and become a joke. This pair of disappointing eyes of mine is not far from being blind. Su Fengnian was momentarily distracted. For some reason, he remembered the blind chess player Lu Su who made a living by gambling on chess in Yongzi Alley in Qingzhou. This person had successfully assisted Zhao Sun in stabilizing his position as king of Jing'an. He had also planned the 1,000-mile rescue at Guangling Road. He had helped Zhao Sun win the praise of the Liang court and the initial trust of the court. He had finally attracted the attention of the Lord of Heaven, who took drastic measures to summon him to Great Peace City. It was not strange that Lu Su did not agree to come to Beiliang. However, Lu Su's calmness in going to the capital was puzzling. Su Fengnian collected his scattered thoughts and said slowly, Huda City has Lu Jinu presiding over military affairs. This is Beiliang's greatest fortune. It won't be a problem to defend it for another half a year. However, this is on the premise that the 3 towns of Huaiyang Pass, Liuya, and Fuling don't divide their forces. If Qingsang City of Liuzhou or Xiaoguang City of Yuzhou are in danger, any one of the battlefronts will be in danger. When the time comes, we'll have no choice but to have Yuzhou's Horned Eagle Commandant Luo Hongkai or Lingzhou's Pearl Commandant Huang Xiaokuai rush to the battlefield. However, before the new city in Liangbei is even larger than Huda City is built, the pressure of transporting troops on such a large scale and over such a long distance is far too great. I'm afraid that not only will we be exhausted, in the end, we won't be able to put out a nearby fire. Therefore, from the looks of it, although our Beiliang has a firm advantage on the battlefield, on the invisible battlefield, we're at most on par with Liangmang. Over at the mouth of the gourd, Xiaoguang City is the last major border city. Yan Wenluan has already issued a military order to Mount Qingliang and the Protectorate. He said that if Xiaoguang City is breached by Beimang before Huda City, then he, Yan Wenluan, will have his vice commander, Qin Yinshui, carry his head to Huaiyang Pass. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. With a grave expression, he said, Beimang probably didn't expect that Liangzhou and Yuzhou would reach such a stalemate, so they're also trying hard to find a way out. Therefore, some time ago, Dongzhou, the great king of the southern courtyard, sent several tens of thousands of Dong family's private army north of Huda City to Liuzhou. Fortunately, as Chu Lushan predicted, he managed to tie down the Dong family's cavalry with 8,000 cavalry. Otherwise, the outcome of the battle in Liuzhou would have been too horrible to contemplate. This battle, which neither side publicized, was actually the most hair-raising battle since the start of the war in Liangmang. Although both sides didn't suffer much losses, as long as Chu Lushan's 8,000 cavalry didn't succeed, he would be able to preserve his own forces and not give the Dong family's cavalry a chance to quickly break into Liuzhou. Otherwise, even if Chu Lushan paid the enormous price of losing all 8,000 of his men in battle to wipe out 20,000 of the Dong family's cavalry, as long as the remaining 10,000 managed to infiltrate Liuzhou, once they joined forces with Lu Gui's army and Tuoba Bodhisattva's personal army, Liuzhou would be as good as gone. Outside the western gate of Liangzhou, we could only watch as the reinforcements of Beimang galloped as they pleased. Not to mention that we can't build that new city in Beiliang. With enough troops to move and store, we can launch an attack on Huaiyang Pass in one go. Of course, now that the situation is different, teacher and I won't hide it anymore. That Ko Jianghui, whose reputation has risen in Guangling, is already our new general in Liuzhou, and he's successfully leading troops to reinforce Qingsang City. Biyao softly said, it seems like Protector General Chu really is the nemesis of Beimang's Dongzhou. Back then, in the first battle between Liang and Beimang, if not for Protector General Chu spoiling Dongzhuo's plans, he might have already become the youngest general in Beimang's history. Today, Protector General Chu is personally leading 8,000 cavalry. It's like a divine army descending from the heavens, causing Dongjue to once again fail on the verge of success. Su Fengnian nodded and joked, Southern Chu and Northern Dong are two fatties. It's probably because our protector general is a little fatter that he has an advantage in battle. Biyao suddenly sighed with emotion. I never thought that there would be a day like today, that I would be able to fight side by side with Bei Mang's enemies, Lu Jinu, the great demon of spring and autumn, Chu Lushan, the commander of Beiliang's infantry, Yan Wenluan, the number one man of the old southern Tang, great ancestor Gu, and so on. Su Fengnian laughed and said, You'll get used to it. Perhaps it's because I grew up here a long time ago that I don't quite have teacher's feelings. Biyao softly muttered, If there comes a day when you get used to this place and can't bear to leave, then what should you do? Chapter 1551. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, Very difficult. Biyao quickly understood what he meant. The chances of Beiliang winning were too small. Regardless of whether Biyao wanted to stay in Beiliang or not, he had no choice. Perhaps when the time came, he would have to flee to the central plains with many scholars. Behind him was the bleak battlefield of Beiliang, where blood flowed for thousands of miles. Furthermore, he, Biyao, wanted to have a place in the imperial court where the civil officials stood, and not the military side. His words just now were just a spur of the moment. So he grunted, That's true. Approaching the cottage, Biyao asked, Is there a geographical map of Beiliang in the cottage? There were a few in the residence of the Taoist master, but they were all too old and crude. Liuzhou was not among them. Su Fengnian brought Mr. White Lotus, who seemed to have mysteriously become Beiliang's advisor, in with him. He took out a map and spread it out on the table. It was already dusk. Su Fengnian had specially lit an oil lamp. Biyao held the copper lamp and leaned over the table, beginning to ask Su Fengnian in detail about the Beiliang border and the distribution of troops within it. He even asked for pen and ink, asking one question and answering the other. A scholar knows the world without leaving the house. This sentence was both correct and incorrect. It was possible to give pointers on the big picture, but it was not enough to support a specific strategy for the time being. This was especially true in Beiliang, where crouching tigers and hidden dragons were hidden. If Biyao wanted to have some achievements in military affairs at the border, he had to have a plan in mind. Otherwise, if he blindly showed off in front of Song Dongming, the talented prime minister, or Li Gongda, the old fox of officialdom, he would only be asking for humiliation. Su Fengnian leaned across the table and said softly, After great ancestor Gu entered Beiliang, my master Li Yishan had a good talk with him. The two of them finally decided to divide Beiliang into 14 important areas of defense. For example, the Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai is in charge of the troops stationed in one of the 14 areas, so he is also one of the captains in the area. His rank is one level higher than Huang Xiaokuai and the others in Lingzhou. Now, other than the general of a province like Huang Fujin, after the last round of replacements by Qin Shiliang, this new group of captains who hold real power are mostly in their prime. There are even a few who are not even 30 years old. They have been loyal to Beiliang since their father's generation and have great enthusiasm for the border. They cherish the country their fathers have built. Therefore, there are some discussions in the various academies. For example, on the surface, I rely heavily on scholars who go to Liangzhou and give them all the seats in the prefectures and county-level offices. But in reality, there are still some prejudices, favoring favoritism, and paying attention to the bloodline of the generals. I accept these kinds of questions. After all, there is nothing I can do. Bei Mang is at my doorstep. I can only dare to promote these people. After Biyao put down his brush, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the map. His finger that was slightly stained with ink slowly brushed across the map. He asked casually, The provisions of the newly built Liuzhou are all under the responsibility of the provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji? Su Fengnian quickly thought about the hidden meaning behind this question, but he could not figure it out. He nodded and said, Sir, you must have heard of Su Beiji's nickname. Moreover, Beiliang has long begun to buy provisions from the neighboring provinces. To tell you the truth, many of the large families who fled Beiliang out of fear on the surface have the hidden identity of spies from the Fu Shui chamber. In the matter of purchasing provisions, they have contributed greatly. Liang and Yu provinces are self-sufficient, so the matter of Liuzhou's provisions is far from an urgent matter. Su Fengnian smiled. I've thought about it. If the Liang imperial court really refuses to let go of the provisions, Beiliang will openly snatch the provisions. Yes, it should be borrowed. Not to mention the Huainan circuit where Kai Nan's 100,000 troops are stationed, even if it's Qinjibao's Shishu circuit, I would dare to snatch it. With Yin Changing acting as the middleman, Han Lin, who had formed a tacit understanding with Beiliang, was appointed as the Huainan circuit administrator. This was a piece of good news. With Beiliang playing the role of the good cop, Han Lin wanted to have a clean reputation. He wanted to establish a mighty and loyal image in the imperial court. Beiliang could just give him as much as he wanted. As for the curses from the court, would Su Fengnian care? As for Qinjibao, didn't you want to go to the Central Plains to pull chestnuts out of the fire? Didn't Xia Guining like to play tricks? Su Yanbing was currently at the southern border of Lingzhou with his junior apprentice brother Han Laozhan, who was appointed as the general of Lingzhou. Without Qinjibao personally overseeing the situation, it would be difficult for the Shishu circuit's northern gate to stop Beiliang from borrowing provisions. As for the timing, Su Fengnian trusted Han Laozhan. Biyao stared at the vast Liuzhou territory and asked, Yang Yuanzhan is in charge of attacking Beiliang's Calabash Gate, which is a natural stronghold. At the very least, he managed to take down Huagong and Luanhe cities. In the eyes of the Beimang Empress, Lu Gui is more worthy of being entrusted with an important task. However, while he is attacking Liuzhou on the western front, his main army has not moved. He is so idle that Beimang has to invite Tuoba Bodhisattva to enter Liuzhou. Now, Dong Zhuo has no choice but to send his private army to Liuzhou to break the stalemate. This Lu Gui, who is known as half of Beimang's Su Shao, is so weak. Su Fengnian slowly explained, Liuzhou has no danger to rely on. If we want to fight, we can only fight fair and square. This is the case for both sides. In terms of military strength, Lu Gui's army definitely has the absolute advantage. Not to mention his 30,000 private army, the 4 military towns in the tiled gentleman's pavilion in the south of Gusai Prefecture have all mobilized their forces. The few old Longguan nobles of the southern dynasties have also taken out 30,000 infantrymen. Gusai Prefecture has a good relationship with Lu Gui and has also taken out 8,000 Chang tribe light cavalry, a total of 100,000 soldiers. However, the Chang tribe cavalry has been defeated by the Longxiang army. As a result, Lu Gui's army, whose combat strength is already inferior to ours, is in a difficult position. On the ground of Liuzhou, whether or not we can defend Xingsang City is not important. The victory or defeat of the main cavalry force is the key to determining the final outcome. With 40,000 cavalry from various powers, against the 30,000 Longxiang army that can abandon Xingsang City, it is not that our Beiliang is conceited, but indeed, Lu Gui does not dare to make any rash moves. Biyao's gaze slowly moved across the map of Liuzhou. Not daring to make any rash moves is the right thing to do. If he does not move, he will be able to deal a fatal blow. Su Fengnian frowned and said, there have been many discussions within the Huayang Pass about how Lu Gui will win by surprise. In order to see the map clearly, the oil lamp in Biyao's hand had unknowingly moved too close. His right cheek was burning hot. Without any change in expression, he moved away slightly and nodded. Of course. The 8,000 cavalry of the Chu Protectorate General have completed their objective, and Ko Jianghuai has entered Liuzhou as a general. The Longxiang army already has powerful generals like Prince's younger brother and Li Mofen, Wang Lingbao. In addition, the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou, and his advisor, Chen Shiliang, are all top-notch talents. There is no need to worry about provisions at the rear. No matter how you look at it, the situation is much better than Liangzhou's Huda City and Yozhou's Huluku. However, I feel that the more this is the case, the more Lu Gui will make a move. Perhaps the reason why Lu Gui, who has the least number of troops on the 3 fronts of Beimang's southern expedition, can be so patient because he is waiting for Dong Zhuo's central front and Yang Yuanzhan's eastern front to fall into a disadvantageous situation. Biyao shook his head and said to himself, "No, it's not perhaps, it's definitely." Su Fengnian was silent. Biyao raised his head, his eyes shining. He asked in a deep voice, "If Lu Gui can use the deaths of 60,000 infantry as bait and attack Qingsang city at all costs, deliberately putting his back to the river and even abandoning the disorderly cavalry, only using the Lu cavalry and the elites brought by Tuoba Bodhisattva as the true main force, will the 30,000 Longxiang army not take the bait? Even if the Longxiang army is willing to take the bait, will Ko Jianghu, who just entered Liuzhou, be able to take it? Once one side enters the battle and falls into the trap, will the other side be able to see the big picture and not help?" Biyao looked at Su Fengnian and finally asked, "I want to know if Beimang has received any spy reports similar to the Beimang Empress's anger towards Lu Gui on the Western Front? Is there any news similar to how the important officials of the Southern Dynasty were extremely dissatisfied with the retreat of the Western Front and attacked Lu Gui in the imperial court?" Su Fengnian's heart trembled. Biyao put down the oil lamp and said calmly, "Then the prince can do all he can to help Liuzhou." Biyao did not speak, and Su Fengnian also did not speak. The room was silent, apart from the occasional sound of the wick bursting. Chapter 1552. Lotus Peak was unprecedentedly grand. It was probably because it had been tainted by Wudang Mountain's mystical aura that people from all walks of life were able to enjoy themselves on the mountain. Under this background, the return journey of Wang Yuanran and his group, who had escaped from the summer town at the foot of the mountain, seemed particularly miserable. Almost all of them were injured. Their departure was even more impressive than when they came. The warmly welcoming Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai sent 100 riders to escort them. During this time, there was also one matter that confused the guests on the mountain. It was said that the children of the Zhongshu province's deputy Zhao Yuling, the Ministry of Appointments' minister Yi Mao Chun, the new Huainan administrator Han Lin, and the Duke of Yan's children had even alarmed the king of Biyao to personally come down the mountain to greet them after they arrived at the foot of the mountain. The two sides regretted not having met earlier. The two groups of nobles were treated so differently that it almost made people mistakenly think that a change was about to take place in Liyang. It wasn't until a shocking rumor spread that the number one swordsman in Jingdo, Qi Jiaj, had disappeared into thin air and did not appear in the group leaving the border. He had been replaced by Dongyue Sword Pool's Chai Qingshan. After some careful thought, everyone finally realized that the king of Biyao was quite sinister. Not only did he secretly act viciously, he also deliberately made those important people unable to eat or sleep in peace. If these words were to spread to the Central Plains, Zhao Yuling and the other central officials would be fine. After all, they were close officials of the emperor and could find an opportunity to talk things out. With the current emperor's wisdom and magnanimity that was not inferior to the previous emperor's, he would certainly not fall for Beiliang's plan to drive a wedge between them. However, Han Lin, who had just left the capital from the position of assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, was about to suffer. How could those arrogant ruffians of the Huainan path not use this against him to cause trouble? With this plan in mind, everyone felt more and more sympathy for Yin Changgang and this group of young talents with bright futures. In particular, that group of Gangnam-do scholars all vowed that they would not let Beiliang's shallow tricks succeed. As long as they returned to Jiangnan, they would spare no effort in the literary world to prove the innocence of Yin Changgang, Han Xingyan, and the others. They would prove that these future pillars of the Liang dynasty had been greatly wronged at the foot of Wudang Mountain. Quite a few elegant and famous scholars had already agreed to pay a visit to the newly appointed Huainan Dao administrator on the way back to support him. Assistant Minister Han Xingyan was known for his courage of the world. They could not let such a loyal official suffer setbacks in his territory. Since they were all scholars, even if they had never met Sir Han, they were duty-bound to help him. Sir White Lotus had made 2 new friends on Wudang Mountain. They were the Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai and the second-in-command of the Yuzhou spy, Sui Taizhan. Through his carefree conversation with the two of them, he learned about the movements on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain, especially the righteous indignation of the Jiangnan scholars. Biyao dismissed this with a smile. At the same time, he sighed deeply. It was not only the little calculations of the elegant scholars, nor was it that Su Fengnian had personally left for Liuzhou to temporarily take over the position of general of Liangzhou that had originally been held by Beiliang's protector general, Chu Lushan. It was more because of the contrast between the two. Biyang's habitual silence. Even when Sui Taizhan talked about the movements of the scholars of the Central Plains, he only treated it as a joke. Even Luo Hongkai, who had rolled through piles of corpses on the border many times, did not show any resentment or depression in front of Biyao. The impression that the two of them gave Biyao was that Biyao had a deep-rooted misunderstanding of the Liang imperial court and did not take it seriously at all. Liang, you scold me? You can scold me all you want, I can't be bothered with you. Attack you with a knife? He wanted to, but he would not do it. It seemed that from the Supreme General Su Shao to the new Prince of Liang, Su Fengnian, they were used to venting their anger on the Beimang barbarians and were not willing to lower themselves to the level of those scholars. Of course, if people like Wang Yuanran rushed to Beiliang in a hurry to be reincarnated and looked as if they were asking for a beating, then things would be much simpler. It would be a waste not to beat them up. Moreover, they would not hesitate to beat them up heavily. Biyao lived in a secluded hut in the Xiang Palace at the top of the mountain. Different from other distinguished guests who were neighbors, Bayao's residence was surrounded by Wudang Taoists. It was a place that a Taoist of the Jing generation had to temporarily leave the mountain to settle some matters. Many Taoists came to visit Mr. White Lotus and ask for advice from Biyao. In the end, they were taught a lesson by the Taoist priest, Qin Zhao, and only then did Biyao have some peace and quiet. In fact, Biyao himself did not dislike this kind of interaction. Biyao actually knew that Zhao Ningxian had said that he would ask for forgiveness and cultivate on Wudang Mountain for 10 years. He was curious as to why this mountain had such a secular atmosphere and was also the ancestral court of Taoism, but the Taoists of various generations on the mountain had to help people interpret their fortunes and write letters every 10 years. Especially in the last 100 years, strange Taoists like Huang Manshan, Wang Zhonglo, Hong Shixiang, and Li Yufu had appeared one after another. No one was willing to ascend, and the incense burned more than Mount Longhu. If one did not become an immortal, what was the point of cultivating? Chapter 1553. When Chang Sui, Su Huang, and the others heard that Mr. White Lotus was in Xiang Palace, they also came to visit Biyao. Perhaps because it was taboo to talk too much, both sides tacitly only talked about local customs and not military matters. However, Li Dongfang and the little monk Nanbei, who he had met once before, came and gave Biyao a big surprise. The little girl carried live chickens and ducks in. Perhaps because they were too tired from the journey, the chickens and ducks were already sickly and had accepted their fate by the time the little girl came in. The little girl said that Taoists of Mount Longhu could also eat meat. She had bought these chickens and ducks in a summer town at the foot of the mountain. She had picked the two largest ones to give to Mr. White Lotus to nourish his body. The little girl also thanked Mr. White Lotus for treating them to tea at the Taoist residence back then. Biyao didn't know whether to laugh or cry, thinking that this little girl was really nostalgic. During dinner, the little girl personally went to Xiang Palace's kitchen to stew a large pot of chicken for Biyao. The little monk Nanbei didn't even dare to eat at the table, squatting by the door and chanting Amitabha. In the end, Biyao hadn't even touched his chopsticks when a woman, led by a little Taoist, angrily came to denounce him. Behind her was a white-robed monk. Biyao hurriedly put down his chopsticks and stood up to welcome them. When the woman saw Mr. White Lotus, her expression became better. However, she still muttered in a low voice, "This girl, it's one thing to give a gift, but what kind of silly girl would steal the largest chicken and duck in the house as a gift? She really takes after her father and doesn't know how to manage the house." After the white-robed monk sat down, he motioned for Biyao to continue eating. He smiled and said, "I heard that the Wu family's Taoist master is already at the foot of the mountain with the imperial edict. However, they have no intention of climbing the mountain for now. However, with Han Gui and Mr. White Lotus from Green Mountain Monastery, they are bullying this poor monk for fighting alone." Biyao suddenly asked an inappropriate question, "Does Mr. know who leader Zhao Go is?" Li Dongfang didn't answer the question. This poor monk is flattered to call Mr. White Lotus, who was personally bestowed by the previous emperor. Biyao, who was usually gentle and polite, was aggressive for the first time. "Some say it is young Tai Sui who died outside the pass." Some say it is the cat man Han Xingxian who died suddenly. Some say it is teacher Lu Hao who was the gatekeeper of Great Peace City. Li Dongxin said straightforwardly, Chao Zhangqing went to the Tu Zen temple to find me. Even he, Zhao Gou's greatest enemy, did not know much. Chao Zhangqing could only guess that it was the imperial tutor who had disappeared without a trace, Yuan Benshi. However, out of the 5 Zhao Gou who really did things, Chao Changqing met 3 of them and killed one of them who was planted in Guangling Path. As for the remaining 4, one of them had taken control of all the northern Qi refinement warriors in the early years. Now, he had no followers. One of them was a person of the Jianghu who controlled everything in the name of the Ministry of Justice. Another replaced the dead one to watch over the movements of Guangling Path. As for the last one, he was shrouded in mystery. I only heard that he was an important chess piece in charge of targeting Biyao. As for who it was, after Yuan Benshi disappeared without a trace, no one knew. Even His Majesty was no exception. Li Dongfang asked curiously, Mr. White Lotus, why are you asking this? Biyao smiled and said, I am going to Mount Qingliang for 2 years. I am afraid I will die there. Li Dongfang frowned and said, do you think that person is in Biyao Palace? That is impossible. With Su Xiao and Li Shan. Biyao shook his head and interrupted, it might not be someone who has been in hiding for a long time. It might be someone who went later. For example, the assistant administrator of Biyao, Song Dongming. Li Dongfang rubbed his bald head and said nothing. The monk in white smiled and said, regardless of whether Song Dongming is Zhao Gou's man or not, Mr. White Lotus' method of using someone else's knife to kill someone is not very good. Biyao, who had not eaten much, put down his chopsticks and said with a smile, one must not have the heart to harm others, but one must always have the heart to guard against others. As for Song Dongming's identity, I am just guessing. But since I have made up my mind to live in Biyao for 2 years, I have to use some dirty tricks. To tell the truth, even if Mr. did not come today, I would have gone to find Mr. tomorrow and asked Mr. to go with me to Mount Qingliang. Therefore, Biyao ate Miss Dongming's meal with a guilty conscience. If it were not for the fact that I was really hungry, I would not have even touched the chopsticks. The monk in white said to himself, if Zhao Gou's leader really is Yuan Benshi, then Prime Minister Song Dongming, who was favored and then abandoned, may really be Zhao Gou's man. But at the same time, if the two are both Zhao Gou's men, Song Dongming may be completely loyal to Biyao. Biyao nodded and said, the Emperor of Liyang did not kill half-inch tongue Yuan Benshi simply because he had outlived his usefulness. Naturally, he was wary of Yuan Benshi's Zhao Gou power. After the previous emperor died, Yuan Benshi was too unpredictable for the current emperor. Compared to the Biyao cavalry's thunderous snoring at the door, Yuan Benshi was like the sound of breathing by the side of the bed. Even though it was very light, it made it harder for people to sleep. Yang Taisui is dead, Lu Haoshi is dead, Han Xingxian is dead, Xia Guining is gone. Who in Great Peace City can keep Mr. Yuan in check, who can be on equal footing with the previous emperor? Speaking of which, if Yin Maochun or someone else is Yuan Benshi's final choice for prime minister, then Song Dongming can only be the shadow minister. Even if Song Dongming is disheartened by Yuan Benshi's death, but I'm afraid. Li Yang felt a headache coming on. He ate quickly and didn't listen to these troublesome matters. The woman ladled a bowl of white rice for the little monk and put some vegetables on the tip of the rice. The little monk squatted at the door and ate. The monk in white looked at this Mr. White Lotus and said with a smile, seeing is believing. Biyao said self-deprecatingly, I must have disappointed Mr. Li Yang sighed and looked down at the table full of food. Biyao has the aura of a palace. It looks, smells, and looks good, but it doesn't taste good. It seems that there is no taste in being the emperor. No wonder that boy surnamed Su. Li Yang suddenly slapped his chopsticks. Father, you can nag people all you want, but I made all this food. The monk in white immediately had his wife get another set of chopsticks and bowls. He gave a thumbs up before eating. Delicious. Chapter 1554. As the sun set in the west, Transverse Water City, the northernmost city of Ji province, was about to close its gates. Red lanterns were being prepared to be hung on the city walls. Right at this moment, a cavalry scout drenched in blood galloped over. When the soldiers on the city walls saw the scout's face clearly, they shouted at the top of their lungs to have the half-closed city gates rise again. The scout with 2 arrows stuck in his back rushed in and shouted with all his might, "Urgent enemy report. Beimang's army is attacking." Not long after, smoke signals were lit within Transverse Water City as a warning to the neighboring Silver Sparrow City. The smoke billowed. It was actually 50,000 Beimang cavalry. Very quickly, the beacon towers to the south of Transverse Water City and Silver Sparrow City were lit one after another. In less than an hour, the entire northern part of Ji province knew of the shocking news of 50,000 Beimang cavalry invading the south. The newly appointed garrison general of Transverse Water City was a fat, middle-aged man. His surname was Gao, and his given name was Ying. This man had been a prominent member of Ji province since the time of Northern Han. He was one of Ji province's foot soldiers under Grand General Yang Xinxing, and a significant portion of his soldiers came from the Gao family of Ji province. Gao Ying didn't even have time to put on his armor. Surrounded by his personal guards and retainers, he hastily arrived at the top of Transverse Water City, his face pale. It wasn't that Gao Ying didn't want to run, but rather, according to the reports from the scouts, Beimang's vanguard cavalry was already within reach. In addition, a large number of horse fences were circling the city south to block his path. Gao Ying's teeth chattered. He was truly regretful. He originally thought that after Wei Jingtang's death, Ji province's General Yuan Tingshan, who had the 7,000 to 8,000 personal cavalry from Lijiayan Castle, had won several battles here in succession. In addition, the Great Pillar of Liaodong, Gu Jiantang, had also received frequent reports of success. Gao Ying reckoned that since the Beimang barbarians were having a hard time fighting Bailiang, they wouldn't send troops to Ji province to take advantage of him. As a result, he had spent 300,000 taels of silver to establish relations with General Yuan and the capital. Relying on his relationship with Yang Xinxing, he was able to snatch the position of garrison general of Transverse Water City from the son of an aristocratic family in the capital. Currently, there were 5,000 garrison soldiers in the city. However, in Ji province, it was even harder to find a general who didn't want to take an empty salary than a 3-legged toad. However, with Yuan Tingshan keeping an eye on them, their table manners were much better. Most of them only dared to take 10 to 20% of the empty salary, or at most 30%. However, Gao Ying wasn't the legitimate son of the main branch. He had spent 300,000 taels of his second branch's private savings to become an official. Therefore, the actual military strength in Transverse Water City was less than 3,000. Furthermore, they were all inexperienced soldiers transferred from southern Ji province. However, could Gao Ying be blamed for this? Although the archers from northern Ji province were more familiar with bows and horses, they were also more expensive. A single archer from northern Ji province was equivalent to 2 of the southern Ji province's infantry who were known as the unrivaled beneath the heavens a few years ago. The old foundation of Ji province had been taken away by Yang Xinxing. In the end, they suffered a great defeat at Guangling Pass. Now, even the elite southern Ji province's infantry, whose combat strength was only slightly inferior, were under Yuan Tingshan's control. If Gao Ying wanted to earn back his capital in 3 years, other than putting up a show in Transverse Water City, what else could he do? Gao Ying turned his head and looked at Silver Sparrow City. The garrison general, Wei Quanshao, had a similar character as him. He had just bought the official hat and had not even gotten used to it yet. When they were young, both of them were a pair of scoundrels who indulged in debauchery. In the past, they were even called the 4 young masters of Ji province. It was said that Wei Quanxiao's Silver Sparrow City was almost emptied out, and all of them were sold at a low price to a few powerful armies in northern Ji province. 2 days ago, when Wei Quanxiao invited him to Silver Sparrow City to drink with prostitutes, Wei Quanxiao, who was a bastard who only cared about money, actually spent a fortune to invite 2 popular courtesans from the city to drink with him. When both of them were having sex on a big bed and 2 rouge horses, Wei Quanxiao even suggested this to Gao Ying. It was said that money could be earned very quickly. With 50 carriages fully loaded with bows, armor, and spears, one could earn at least 10,000 taels of silver, and it was guaranteed that the journey would be smooth and unimpeded. Gao Ying was puzzled at that time. Although the general of Ji province, Yuan Tingshan, did not manage the border affairs well, he had always been very strict. Wei Quanshao laughed and scolded him for being a pig-headed man. With his thick fingers, he wrote the surnames of the two patrons on the back of the courtesan, Li and Han. Gao Ying immediately understood what was going on. It was the Li family of Wild Goose Castle who was on the same side as Yuan Tingshan. And the Han family of Valiant Bravery, who was once exterminated, and the Han family of Valiant Bravery, who had made a comeback. One of them had the support of the Great Pillar State, who was in charge of the military affairs of the two Liao provinces, and the other one was the Deputy General of Ji Province, Han Fang, who was promoted by the Emperor without restraint. Gao Ying and Wei Quanshao knew nothing about managing an army, but under the influence of their families, they could not be too bad as officials. No matter how many military achievements Yuan Tingshan had, he could only be the general of Ji Province at the border. Otherwise, if his father-in-law was already in charge of the two Liao provinces, and his son-in-law was not enough to manage just one Ji province, how could he manage the whole river province? Therefore, he needed the only son of the Han family in Ji province to keep him in check. No matter how much the emperor rewarded him, no matter how much military power he gave him, his foundation was still shallow. For the next 5 years, the deputy general of Ji province, Han Fang, would still be a trusted general at the border. Before he could see him, he could hear his voice. Gao Ying felt like the entire city wall was shaking. With the help of the last remaining light, at the end of Gao Ying's vision, a black line suddenly appeared on the horizon. Gao Ying's heart was like dead ashes. The Ji North defense line was completely finished. This fatty who originally came to Horizontal Water City to eat empty pay didn't seem to have the time to earn any money from smuggling at the border. Gao Ying looked around in a daze. Apart from the personal retainers he brought from Gao family, the other guards on the city wall were all young and immature. He heard that in northern Ji province, as long as they wore armor and held a spear in the city, they would be able to obtain a decent salary. Then, they all came to Horizontal Water City. They didn't even know that the previous general, Wei Jingtang, the former Grand Secretary Zhang Julu's student, was once forced to leave the city to fight against Beimang's cavalry. 800 horizontal water cavalry and 4,000 elite infantrymen all died in one battle. They also didn't know that even earlier, the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry that quietly crossed 1,000 li to ambush Beimang was already here. This Horizontal Water City actually wasn't peaceful at all. Many of Horizontal Water City's soldiers still held onto a fluke, naively believing that the majestic Beimang cavalry was only here to show off their strength, that perhaps Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan would soon lead his army to defeat the enemy in one fell swoop, or that the Great Pillar State Gu Jiantang was currently leading troops over from Liaodong. In one go, Wang Sui gathered 50,000 elite cavalry from Beimang's eastern border army. Qiu Zhemo Great Ru Zhishui and Dong Zhemo Great Wang Jingchong each had 10,000 cavalry, as well as 3 young generals who braced themselves and ignored the tactful advice of the 2 Beimang great generals. 50,000 men, compared to Beimang's eastern border army that was gradually increasing from the biting grasslands to nearly 300,000, didn't seem like a serious injury. However, in deciding the direction of a large-scale war, the number of people was important, but it wasn't absolute. Beimang's newly appointed eastern border commander Wang Sui took away 50,000 elite soldiers, pretty much the same as taking away half of the eastern border's essence energy. The 2 generals on the eastern border who were comparable in seniority to Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan, 1, their authority was lower than Wang Sui's, 2, the 2 of them couldn't control the 3 grassland-born generals at all, let alone Great Ru Zhishui and Wang Jingchong, these type of children of influential families. They could only watch as these 50,000 people ran to Ji province. If this was the Li Yang dynasty, this was naturally something unimaginable. Great Ru Zhishui was riding on an ink-colored steed from the grassland. He raised his head and looked at the outline of Horizontal Water City. With a ferocious smile on his face, he said, "Once we enter the city, we can still have dinner." There was still some distance before they could launch their assault. Wang Jingchong didn't ride his steed to join his personal army of 10,000 soldiers. Instead, he stood beside Wang Sui with Qiu Zhemo on his left and right. He frowned and said, according to the spy, both generals Gao Ying, Wei Quanshao, and Wei Quanshao are good-for-nothings. But, if they fight with their lives on the line, it will be disadvantageous for us to fight at night. Furthermore, all 50,000 soldiers are cavalry. Although they can dismount and fight, they don't have any siege weapons. Can we really take down these two important towns in Ji province so easily? Chapter 1555. Wang Sui sneered and said, when leading troops to war, other than paying attention to the changes on the battlefield, you also have to pay attention to the situation outside the battlefield. When you have the chance to go to the Central Plains in the future, it will be even more so. Wang Jingchong, why do you think Yuan Tingshan would let two idiots guard horizontal water Silver Hawk? Is it because he doesn't have any spare troops? Even if we take a step back, Li Jiayin Castle, which is on the same line as him, has 8,000 private cavalry. Their cavalry battle isn't weak, so what problem can they have in defending the city? Isn't this clearly giving way to us? Otherwise, if we continue to win battles, how long do you think he will be the general of Jizhou? The Guangling Road War is so unbearable. If an imperial edict is sent to the general's mansion of Jizhou, the imperial court wants him to be the general of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, will he dare to say no? Even if he dares, that kid's father-in-law will be the first to take care of him. Great Ru Shiwei said impatiently, I don't believe that Gao Ying and Wei Quanshao have the courage and insight of Wei Jingtang, and don't have the ability of Wei Jingtang. After taking down the two cities, whether we go south to Jizhou, west to Hezhou, or finally back to the east, we will have great prospects. General, just give the order to attack the city. Wang Jingchong shouldn't fight with me for the merit of horizontal water city. Wang Sui sneered and said, attack the city? Attack my ass. If you want to die in battle, die in Yuzhou. Great Ru Shiwei was stunned. What do we do there? Wang Sui looked at the border city shrouded in twilight and said, tell them that if they surrender, we won't kill them. Give them an hour to think about it. Also, we only want the food and armor in the city. As for the people, as long as they are willing to take off their armor and leave horizontal water city empty-handed, we will let them go. Great Ru Shiwei muttered, boring. Wang Sui turned to Wang Jingchong and said, go and tell those three brutes that horizontal water city will belong to you and Great Ru Shiwei. Silver Hawk City will belong to the three of them. Wang Jingchong nodded and was about to leave when he heard Wang Sui say indifferently, when the soldiers of the two cities retreat to the south, it will be up to the five of you how to earn merits. Remember, leave some alive to pass the message to Yuan Tingshan, so that Ji province will know that we are heading south. After that, according to the arrangement, horizontal water and silver harrier cities will each leave 3,000 soldiers behind to guard their cities. The rest will follow me to River Province. After Wang Jingchong left, Wang Sui asked with a smile, Lord Qiu Zhemo, I heard that you want to have dinner with us. Great Ru Shiwei, whose eyes were burning with passion, chuckled and said, there are 2,000 to 3,000 people in horizontal water city. It's barely enough for me and my children to have a meal. It's not enough to fill our stomachs, but it's enough to keep us from being hungry for a while. Wang Sui was expressionless. He raised his head and silently looked at the horizontal water city that had resisted countless grassland cavalry since it was built. At the end of the summer of the first year of Xiangfu, Hengshui and Yinyao fell into the hands of Beimang. It was rumored that Beimang's main force on the eastern front was going to bypass the two Liao defense lines and use Jizhou as a breakthrough point to invade the south. Everyone in Liang was shocked. Not long after the newly appointed Huainan Dao administrator Han Lin took up his post, he was given the title of Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court. Huainan Dao Jidushi Kai Nan was given the title of Primary Grade 2 West Protecting General. Jizhou General Yuan Tingshan was given the title of Primary Grade 3 West Protecting General. Jizhou Deputy General Han Fong was given the power to expand by 10,000 troops. Along with this imperial edict, there was another secret edict delivered personally by Song Tonglu, the chief eunuch of the ceremony directorate. The Battle of Jizhou had to be limited to Jizhou North. The sound of the bugle horn rang out across the vast land around Qingsang City. Liuzhou finally welcomed the first battle that involved almost all of the troops on the Western Front. The 30,000 infantrymen of the Longguan nobles were the main force of the siege. They slowly spread out and attacked Qingsang City. The cavalry of the four towns within the tiled gentleman's pavilion protected the south of the infantrymen, facing off against the Longxiang army. The commander of the Western Front, Lu Gui, sat on the back of his horse, personally supervising the siege. Behind him were the 30,000 Lu family troops and the 10,000 personal guards that Tuoba Bodhisattva brought. A noble general from Longguan didn't care about the success of the siege at all. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at the large group of northern Liang black-armored soldiers 3 li away. Could the cavalry of the four towns of Gusai Prefecture really block the charge of the Longxiang army? If the Longxiang army broke through their cavalry formation and even the infantrymen attacking the city, they would only need 2 rounds and there would be no need to fight this battle. Did he have to give the Beiliang the biggest victory since the Battle of Liangmang? Did General Lu not understand that the Battle of Liuzhou was not just about a small Qingsang city? Was it worth the risk of the entire Western Front to take down Qingsang City? He finally could not hold it in anymore. He rode his horse to Lu Gui's side. Just as he was about to speak, Lu Gui coldly said, "I have already made up my mind. There is no need to say anything more." This Beimang general with a good background was also angered. However, he still suppressed his anger and tried to speak calmly to this old man who was highly regarded by the emperor. "Great general, to split up the cavalry formation like this is too risky. It is not difficult to take down a small Qingsang city. Even if we hide 20,000, no, even 10,000 heavy armored infantrymen among the 30,000 infantrymen waiting for the Longxiang army to charge, it is still fine. To stake everything on one throw and underestimate the strength of the Beiliang cavalry formation, great general, this is not right." Lu Gui did not say anything. This general finally said angrily, "Great general, you are treating the lives of 30,000 Longguan soldiers as a joke just for your own position." Currently, there were undercurrents in the western capital of the Southern Dynasty. The generals of the Western Front who came from the Southern Dynasty naturally heard about it. Saying that Lu Gui did not live up to his name was already being polite. Those who were not polite would directly request for the emperor to change the commander. Even the candidates were very clear. Other than Tuoba Bodhisattva who was already at the border of Liuzhou, even Zhong Tan who shone brilliantly at the eastern front of Heluku was brought out. If it was said that the military god Tuoba Bodhisattva was pushed out, it was still acceptable. However, to use Zhong Tan was simply slapping Lu Gui's old face. How long had Zhong Tan been in the army? How long had the great general Lu Gui been in the army? The king of the old southern court, Huang Songpu, had returned after his retirement and replaced the useless Lu Gui as the commander of the Western Front. There was no doubt that he had the most support in the Southern Dynasty. Therefore, the Eastern Front army that had been stationed in Liuzhou for a long time had all sorts of rumors circulating. At this moment, the general's expression changed drastically. A horse slowly approached. The man wearing light armor on the horse's back said in a deep voice, "Scram back to the battle formation." The general swallowed his saliva and turned his horse back to the infantry formation without another word. Lu Gui looked at the person who came and asked with a smile, "King of the Northern Court, do you think that the Longxiang army will dare to take the bait? 30,000 infantry soldiers who are at the mercy of others and the cavalry of the four towns who are not strong enough. The bait is big enough." The person who came was Tuoba Bodhisattva. He glanced at Qingsang City and said, "Wang Lingbao might not be able to see through the great general's intentions, but Li Mofen, who is also the deputy general of the Longxiang army, will most likely be able to see through it. It's just that Yang Guangdou and Chen Shiliang are in that city. If Li Mofen is smart enough, he will also take advantage of the situation. Otherwise, he can forget about being promoted in the Beiliang frontier army. Even if Li Mofen is cold enough, as long as the Longxiang army is in a stalemate, Li Mofen can't just stand by and watch them die. I believe that he isn't that cold-hearted." Lu Gui chuckled and said, "On the surface, I, an old fellow whose position is in danger, need to try anything. Beiliang's Huda City and Xiaoguang City are fighting fiercely on two fronts. Lu Province also needs a great victory to raise the morale of the people, so the time has come for both sides. Lu Gui restrained his smile and said, speaking of which, if it weren't for the king of the northern court's 20,000 soldiers rushing over, even if I, Lu Gui, lost my position, I still wouldn't have fought this battle. In Lu Province, if I can't take down the entire Longxiang army in one go, small fights are meaningless. The Battle of Liangmang was originally going to be won in Lu Province. Now, it's just going around in a big circle. Tuoba Bodhisattva hesitated and said in a low voice, after this battle, General, you will most likely be summoned back to the southern court. Lu Gui smiled and said, it's fine. Just treat it as making space for Fatty Dong on the central line. Tuoba Bodhisattva chuckled and said, General Lu, don't worry. In the future, you and I will enter the Central Plains hand in hand. Lu Gui nodded. The old man sighed and said, I feel sorry for these brave men of the southern court. They came from the desert, but in the end, they died in the desert. They didn't even get to see the prosperity of the Central Plains, even a glimpse would have been good. PS1, yesterday, writing that Ancestor Gu and Li Shan met was a slip of the pen. PS2, every Alliance Master will be given a set of physical books in the snow. I definitely didn't forget this. When the books are finished, they will be given out together with a signature. However, they won't sign every book. They will only sign one book, but they will write a message. As for what to write, the Alliance Master can suggest it in the book review section. Chapter 1556. In a military camp of Yuzhou Province less than 200 miles away from the mouth of the gourd, a thin, one-eyed old general slowly walked onto the reviewing platform. Before the old man showed up, Qin Yinshui, the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang Province, Huang Fuji, the general of Yuzhou Province, and Hu Kuei, the provincial governor of Yuzhou Province, were already standing on the platform. The old man then walked to the center of the platform. Strangely, even laymen who were not familiar with the army of Yuzhou Province would consider it reasonable for the old man to be the head of the army. Standing there with his hands on his saber, the old general in iron armor remained silent for a long time as he watched those officers and soldiers who remained still under the hot sun. The old man remained silent as if he wanted to look over all the tens of thousands of infantrymen who were going to set out for the battle and identify all the flags of the old camp of the infantry of Yuzhou Province. With a gloomy look, the old general finally opened his mouth slowly. The general has passed away. The Lord is not in Yuzhou Province. Even if I, Yan Wenluan, don't die on the battlefield, I don't have many years left. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to say something that I've been hiding for almost 2 decades. The old general picked up his saber and pointed at Qin Yinshui, the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang Province, on his side. Old Qin, you must know our deputy commander. I remember that this guy accompanied me to drink in Lord Xingliang's mansion 16 years ago. At that time, Qin Yinshui was just a class 3 general. The general joked that it was a waste of talent for you to lead 40,000 to 50,000 infantrymen in Yuzhou Province. Why not go to the border of Liangzhou Province and give you 30,000 cavalries? Yan Wenluan didn't look at her best friend who had known her for most of her life. She just pointed at the embarrassed Qin Yinshui with the cold knife. This old bastard can't hold his liquor, and his behavior is even worse when he's drunk. He was pretending to be drunk at that time, but as soon as the general said that, he immediately stood up. His eyes were so bright. Guess what the deputy commander of the infantry of Beiliang said? He said, "Do it." Why didn't he do it? Of course, the general didn't succeed in poaching him. Why? Did Qin Yinshui regret? No, I, Yan Wenluan, was too anxious and almost fought with the great general. I still remember clearly what I said at the time. As soon as I smashed my wine cup, I stood up and told the Grand General that Beiliang's infantry only had this much strength. For the past 2 years, the Liangzhou cavalry had swindled and stolen so many of them. They had picked out most of the old ones, and even some of the young ones weren't spared. How could I, Yan Wenluan, still be the commander of Beiliang's infantry? It's not impossible for Qin Yinshui to join the cavalry of Liangzhou Province. However, you have to throw Yuan's Wuzong, Chu Lushan and Qi Danghua into our Beiliang infantry. The veteran General Chen Yun lowered his head as if he had turned a deaf ear to Yan Wenluan's words. However, he probably wanted to dig a hole and hide in it after being exposed so mercilessly by Yan Wenluan. Yan Wenluan then pointed at Yozhou's provincial governor Hu Kuei with the cold knife. This provincial governor is the founder of our Beiliang's crossbowmen. He is the most legitimate cavalry general. When Lord Hu replaced Wang Peifang as the provincial governor of Yuzhou, he came to me, Yan Wenluan, to establish a relationship with me. According to the rules of the officialdom, he said some polite words to an old man like me. Then, I asked him a question. How did he feel about being an official in Yuzhou, which had fewer warhorses than Lingzhou a few years ago? Provincial governor who is an honest man, so he told me honestly that he felt quite sullen. He said that he thought he had a chance to be Lu Jinu's assistant in Huda City. Otherwise, he could have gone to Liuzhou's Longxiang army to work with his old subordinate Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao. That's not bad either. Yan Wenluan leaned on the knife with both hands again and looked at the more than 10,000 infantry soldiers. Our Beiliang has 300,000 border soldiers. Therefore, in Liang, I've always heard that Beiliang's 300,000 iron cavalry are the best in the world. I found it strange. Beiliang's cavalry has never made up more than half of the border army. How did it become 300,000 iron cavalry? Does Liang think that our Beiliang infantry doesn't exist? It seems like Beiliang doesn't take our infantry seriously either. The one-eyed old general tilted his chin to the east and sneered, "There's a fellow in Jizhou named Yang Shenxing. He's the idiot who was later toyed with by a few youngsters at the Guangling Road. Back then, he wasn't even fit to carry my shoes. Under his command are tens of thousands of infantry soldiers left behind by the old Northern Han. They've come up with the nickname Southern Ji Infantry. Afterwards, for the past decade or so, they've been called the unrivaled in the world in all of Liang. In addition, there's also the Wufeng army led by Wang Tongshan, the number one general under the command of the king of Yen from the southern border, and Wu Zhongshuan's Dejia. Their reputations aren't small." The old man paused for a moment. "If that's all, I, Yan Wenluan, can tolerate it. After all, we can't go to Jizhou or Nanjiang to fight with them. Besides, we northern Liang people are not good at talking. However, let's not talk about Beiliang. Let's talk about our Beiliang. Let's not talk about Liangzhou, Lingzhou, or even Liuzhou. Let's talk about our Yuzhou. In Luanha City, our infantry battalion was stripped of its battalion number. Who was it that crossed Hezhou and entered Jizhou, and in the end, at the mouth of the gorge, reduced 10,000 soldiers to only 3,000? We traveled 1,000 li, fought a series of battles to the death, and killed nearly 30,000 enemies. We almost completely paralyzed the Beimang barbarians' eastern supply line." Yan Wenluan mocked himself. "What? Do you think that our Yuzhou army also has heroes?" Yan Wenluan laughed, "Of course. However, it's a pity that the no-retreat battalion of 3,400 soldiers is Yozhou's 1st Cavalry Battalion. The prince who fought alongside the 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry is an ordinary soldier in the no-retreat battalion in name. It has nothing to do with you, a bunch of pitiful creatures who don't have warhorses and only have 2 legs." The old man's face turned ferocious. "Let's not talk about Yu Wandao, the deputy general of Yuzhou cavalry, or Shi Yulu and Fan Wenyao, who were promoted to general of Vao cavalry and general of Agile cavalry. Let's talk about Tianheng, the newly appointed chief general of 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry." At that time, this old man despised the prince for not daring to fight to the death, and even said that the prince had used up all his courage after resisting the imperial decree. Therefore, he had long retired and returned to his farm. That was why Yu Wandao was appointed as the deputy general of 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry. Tianheng, a bastard who never went to Ji Bei or outside the mouth of the gourd, is the only one who dares to slap his chest and say, "Old Yan, don't worry, I, Tianheng, promise you that I'll create another cavalry battalion for you." The old man placed the cold saber on his waist again and rubbed his cheeks. He took a few steps forward and asked with a deep voice, "Since when did the Yuzhou infantry fall to such a state?" The entire place was silent, but everyone's eyes were red. Yan Wenluan pointed at herself and said, "Ever since I, Yan Wenluan, joined the Su family's army, I've been following the great general for 36 years. From the very first day, I was a foot soldier, and today, I'm a major second-grade general. In the end, I'm just an old foot soldier. I don't dare to say that I'm the leader of the entire Biyao infantry, but I, Yan Wenluan, am the one who raised all your Yuzhou infantry." The one-eyed old man casually pointed in the direction of Xiaoguang city behind him and said, "Over there, and to the north, you'll see the Beimang barbarians. They claim to have an army of 200,000. Both Crouching Bao city and Luanha city are gone, and the Beimang barbarians say that Xiaoguang city will fall soon." The old man turned around and said, "But I, Yan Wenluan, will not agree to it." At the northern border of Yuzhou and River Province, a huge scarlet flag was flapping in the wind. The chief general of Yuzhou cavalry, Tianheng, his deputy general, Yu Wandao, general of Vao cavalry, Shi Yulu, and general of Agile cavalry, Fan Wenyao, were all riding their warhorses in a line. Behind them were 30,000 light cavalrymen from Yuzhou. The old general, Tianheng, had a simple appearance. He didn't look like a general with great power. If he wasn't wearing armor, he would look more like an old farmer. At that time, this old man was resentful of the young vassal king's inaction. In a fit of anger, he resigned from his post and returned to his hometown. He used the excuse that he was old and his body couldn't withstand the torment, so he could go home and play with his grandchildren. Only then did Yu Wandao have the chance to lead an army to Jibei. But in fact, the entire Yuzhou knew that the old general had no children. They had all died outside the pass. Later on, Su Fengnian and Yu Wandao appeared outside the mouth of the gorge together. Out of the 10,000 cavalrymen, only 3,000 of them returned. When the old men, whose experience was not much inferior to Yan Wenluan, Chen Yinshui, and the others, heard the news, they rushed to Yan Wenluan's tent that very night. Tianheng was waiting outside. Even when the Huayang Pass Protectorate issued an order to restore Tianheng's status as a general, Yan Wenluan still refused to accept it. In the end, Su Fengnian was forced to write a letter to Yan Wenluan personally. Only then did Yuzhou reluctantly admit Tianheng as the chief general of Yuzhou cavalry. The old man pressed the hilt of his saber with one hand and turned to Yu Wandao with a laugh. "Old Yan must be furious with me this time. But you can't blame me for this. This guy didn't even care about our friendship for half a lifetime and refused to see me." Chapter 1557. Yu Wandao and the others smiled knowingly. Tianheng and Great General Yan Wenluan were old brothers who had exchanged their lives for each other. In the early years, one of them was a captain of the infantry, while the other was a captain of the cavalry. In order to save Yan Wenluan, who was trapped in the enemy formation, Tianheng disobeyed orders and took the initiative to rescue him. In the Great General's rage, Tianheng was demoted from a captain to an ordinary cavalryman. In the fierce competition in the Su family's army, Tianheng was one step behind. Those of the younger generation, such as Su Pu, Wang Fei's brother Wu Qi, Yuan Zuozong, and Hu Kuei, had all surpassed Tianheng at that time to become the leading general of the cavalry. By the time the Su family died, Tianheng had only become a fourth-ranked general. It was only when Yan Wenluan personally asked the great general for him that Tianheng was promoted to a rank and moved from Liangzhou to Yuzhou. However, after more than 10 years, compared to the likes of Wei Taizhan, who had retired from high positions and returned home with glory, or the current deputy commander Jean Partridge Zhou Kong, Tianheng could be considered an extremely depressed veteran of the Beiliang army. Tianheng stopped smiling and said to Yu Wandao, "General Yu, Beimang's 50,000 elite cavalrymen on the eastern front said they were going to attack Ji province, but we all know that these barbarians are heading straight for Yuzhou. They want to cooperate with Yang Yuanzan at the mouth of the gorge to take down Xiaoguang city and invade Yuzhou. Our original plan was for you and me to split into two groups. One group would intercept those 50,000 at the border of the River of Spirits, while the other group would continue north along the outer edge of the mouth of the gorge. Before we set out, we said that you and Shi Yulu would lead 15,000 cavalrymen here to wait for the Beimang army, while Fan Wenyao and I would lead 15,000 cavalrymen north, with General Yu's no-retreat camp as the vanguard. But I thought. Yul Wandao interrupted with a smile, General, no buts. Since we agreed to use the troops this way, there's no reason to change it at the last minute. Tianheng glared. Yozhou's 30,000 cavalrymen. Am I, Tianheng, the leading general, or are you, Yul Wandao, the leading general? Compared to the scholarly Fan Wenyao, the new Beiliang's first general, Shi Yulu, had a rougher temperament. Yul Wandao felt somewhat helpless. Tianheng looked at the wind and sand in the distance and said, although our superiors didn't say it clearly, Lu province is facing such a great crisis. Even His Highness has gone there in person. All the other garrisons in Beiliang also followed His Highness to Lu province. Therefore, it's definitely not simple for our Yuzhou cavalry to do the opposite at this critical moment. In Fan Wenyao's words, it's a great scheme. Beimang has 50,000 elite cavalry. Not to mention Dongyue's consort Old Wang Sui, the Qiu and Dong generals on the eastern front are not simple either. Tianheng suddenly laughed. Yul Wandao, don't think that you can look down on me just because you won 2 great battles in Jizhou and Heluku. When I picked up the first-generation Su family saber, you were still drinking milk. Shi Yulu was brought to the position of general of cavalry by the old general Tianheng, so he did not have any taboos in his speech. He joked, old general, you can't say that. Although General Yu is young, he is not careless at all in war, unlike you. Tianheng suddenly raised his voice, Shi Yulu hurriedly swallowed the word inferior and laughed, not as good as you, old general. Tianheng snorted coldly, but there was a smile in his eyes, then it settled. Yul Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Wenyao, you 3 will take 20,000 men and go out of Heluku. I will take 10,000 men to guard here. I don't expect to defeat the enemy cavalry, but I want to delay them from entering Yuzhou. Fan Wenyao frowned. He wanted to say something but stopped. He gave Shi Yulu a look. The latter understood and whispered, old general, you can't change the marching strategy so carelessly. Tianheng waved his hand, the mouth of the gourd is the most important. Whether or not we can catch the turtle in the jar will depend on whether your 20,000 cavalry can hold on to the mouth of the pocket. Although the Huayang Pass Protectorate had only sent a secret military order to the Yuzhou cavalry, everyone present could guess the truth. Although they were shocked, who wouldn't feel their blood boiling? If your Beimang Dongzhuo wants to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point, then our Beiliang cavalry will wipe out your eastern Heluku army in one fell swoop. Gazing at these faces that were far younger than his, Tianheng softly said, we're all on the same side, so I won't beat around the bush. Of the 30,000 Yuzhou cavalry, most of them were young people. Why is that? Because after fighting Wang Sui's army to the death and surviving, even if they have military merits, they won't be great and definitely can't compare to going to Heluku. It's enough for me, Tianheng, to be a third-rank general in this life. When I joined the army, I didn't have the spirit of a scholar like you, Yul Wandao. Back then, I wanted my whole family to starve to death. I really couldn't live anymore, so I tied my head to my belt and joined the army. How could I have imagined that I would become a general one day? Who would have thought? Tianheng laughed happily. Don't talk nonsense with me. Don't you know what kind of temper I, Tianheng, have? Don't talk about old Yen not being able to change my mind. Back then, even in front of the great general, I would still act as I should. At this time, a group of scouts galloped over. It was a group led by Commandant Fan Fun. The rider riding alongside Fan Fun was actually a child. There were 2 disproportionate Beiliang sabers hanging from his waist. He stood on the horse's back with his hands tucked into his sleeves, looking very much like an expert. Fan Fan reported to the generals that there was no sign of Beimang horses within 50 li of them. Tianheng called out to the scout who was about to turn around and head north. He smiled at the child and asked, are you the little general of our Yuzhou cavalry, Fang Long? I heard that you alone killed several hundred Beimang barbarians outside Heluku. The child nodded with a straight face. Fan Fan couldn't help but say, General Tian, this child is actually thin-skinned in front of outsiders. Didn't he just ask me if he could become an official scout after paying off his debt and making a meritorious service? This child has 2 cold sabers. One was given to him by someone else, and the other was temporarily lent to him by us. Isn't he thinking that he can legitimately have a second cold saber? Tianheng laughed heartily. From now on, you are the corporal of the 8th Yuzhou Cavalry. Yudilong asked, does your words matter? My master said that I have to follow the rules. Otherwise, he won't let me stay in Yuzhou. Tianheng was suddenly speechless and somewhat embarrassed. He dared to act shamelessly in front of Yan Wenluan, who was his sworn friend, but he really didn't dare to play dumb with that young prince. Yu Wandao smiled and helped him out. General Tian's words are effective in all military affairs of the Yuzhou Cavalry. And don't forget, your master is still an ordinary soldier of no retreat battalion. So even without General Tian's words, I, Yu Wandao, as the commanding officer of no retreat battalion, and you, Yu Dilong, as the corporal of the 8th Yuzhou Cavalry, will still be effective. The child standing on horseback clenched the cold saber at his waist and said seriously, Generals, please be at ease. I will definitely kill more enemies this time than last time. Tianheng smiled and waved his hand. The child and the scout captain, Fan Fun, and the others rode away. Then Tianheng said to the 3 sternly, I, Tianheng, am an old man who fought his way out of the spring and autumn war. My strength is not as strong as it was back then, so Biyao will depend on you in the future. Tianheng lowered his head and looked at the 6th generation Su family saber at his waist. After looking up, he suddenly said, General Yu, I didn't leave anything behind in my life, just a run-down house that isn't worth much. But there are still 5 sabers at home. Then I'll leave them to you, Yu Wandao, to keep them for me. If you have the chance in the future, tell the younger generation about the story of that Yuzhou veteran. How about it? Yu Wandao, Shi Yulu, and Fan Wenyao were all silent. Tianheng clasped his hands and laughed, goodbye. The battle to attack and defend Huda city was in full swing. A cavalry army of only about 10,000 quietly left the encampment and headed east like a lion hunting a rabbit. The leader of the cavalry was the commander of Bailiang's cavalry, Yuan Zuozong. His momentum was like a rainbow. Almost at the same time, there were 2 cavalry armies that had never fully appeared on the battlefield. They separately headed to the 2 dangerous passes at the junction of the cold and dark north. The 2 passes were heavily guarded, all of them elite Yuzhou infantry. The area around the pass was heavily guarded. There had always been an iron law that if unrelated people appeared, they would be killed without mercy. A few months ago, as a large number of sealed items were added to the 2 passes, a large number of Bailiang's top crossbowmen began to secretly roam around these 2 places. The 2 cavalry armies added together only had a little over 9,000 people. It was not weird for one person to have 2 horses, but what was shocking was that each of these war horses were Bailiang A-grade war horses. One must know that in the entire Biyao, only 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry could be equipped with A-grade war horses. Yuzhou only had 300 to 400 of them. Lingzhou did not even have a single one. These strange horsemen clearly didn't carry cold swords or crossbows, but every one of them was an elite of the border army with outstanding physical strength. Their robust physiques and their swift and fierce aura were intimidating even if they didn't even wear light armor. One was the Rouge Cavalry. The other was the Wei Bear Cavalry. When they were on the battlefield, all of them wore armor. That was the Rouge Cavalry, the Wei Bear Cavalry. During the Battle of Huda City, when Lu Zhou was in a state of emergency, when Yan Wenluan had to move 10,000 death warriors to reinforce Xiaoguang City. 20,000 Yuzhou Light Cavalry. 10,000 Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. The Iron Cavalry of the Bailiang Cavalry, 9,000 True Heavy Cavalry. They would all appear outside the mouth of the gourd. Chapter 1558. Liangzhou's Huda city had become the second fishing island of the Central Plains. However, that time, it was the Su clan's Iron Cavalry that was obstructed in the Central Plains. This time, it was the Northern Mang's horseshoes that were densely packed together in the Dragon Eye Plains outside the city. The great king of the southern courtyard, Dongzhua, personally led a crow's pen, patrolling a troop of infantry that was ready to attack. Beside this fatty was a young man and woman of noble status. Among them, the sickly-looking young man had many identities. None of them were simple. He was Chun Jinzhou of Northern Mang's four great Jinzhou, the leader of the Southern Dynasty's strategist, the chess, sword, and music school's divination operator. Of course, his most fundamental identity was Tuoba Bodhisattva's eldest son, Tuoba Chi-yun. The woman who had just been officially taken away by Zhong Tan of the Calabash Vanguard was called Yeluyuhu. This man and woman almost succeeded in scheming against Su Fengnian outside the Calabash Vanguard. Unfortunately, Yuan Zuozong led 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry to the battlefield, making them and that Taiping commandant's efforts go to waste. Dong Zhuo pointed at Huda's city with his horsewhip and said, Huda's city, which is said to be able to support 10 years of war, has run out of winches and wooden bales in less than half a year. We've also used up more than half of the bricks and clay bales. We've also cut down countless iron bales, spears, and battering poles. There are only 3 crossbows left on the city wall that are still intact. The broken ones have piled up into mountains. Of course, there are still many small and medium crossbows and light crossbows in the city. There are still hundreds of thousands of arrows in the warehouse. However, compared to Xiangfan City, which had less than 100,000 soldiers but 300,000 civilians, Huda's city has a fatal flaw. There are too few people. Crossbows are dead. If they are broken, they can go to the warehouse and get new ones. The Bailiang frontier army in Huda's city is not immortal. Their arm strength is far inferior to the early stage. If you too have the opportunity to watch the battle, you should be able to see that most of the archers on the city wall have bandages on their arms. To put it bluntly, if you give me another 3 months, Dong Zhuo will be able to stand 100 steps away from the city. I reckon that not many archers will be able to pierce through my armor and kill me. Tuoba Chi-yun, whose body emitted a faint medicinal smell, had a solemn expression and did not comment. Because His Majesty had personally deprived Xia Zhemo of his position, Yeluyuhu came to Tiger Head City in a fit of pique to relax. She glanced at the fat man with a playful expression. He was a 35-year-old king of the southern courtyard, and he had millions of soldiers in his hands. He was almost as powerful as the old Prince Liang, Su Shao, and the 2 Liao Gu Jiantang. It was this guy who had insisted on attacking Bailiang first and had caused such a big commotion, causing His Majesty and the Taiping commandery to bear great pressure. In the end, other than Yang Yuanzhan on the Eastern Front, whose merits could barely offset his faults, the other 2 fronts were overshadowed. Especially Fatty Dong himself, who was forcibly blocked outside Liangzhou Pass by Huda's city. Even Lu Gui, who had only lost a few thousand men, had been cursed as an old dog in the Western Jing court. For the time being, no one had the courage to impeach Commander-in-Chief Dong Zhuo. Yeluyuhu was very curious about how long this fat man, who privately called His Majesty, Sister Emperor, could last. Dong Zhuo seemed to casually mention 3 months, but Yeluyuhu, who knew the rules of the court very well, sneered in her heart. Had he fallen to the point where he needed her and Tuoba Chi-yun to help him pass on a message to some people? Or was it that His Majesty and the Taiping commandery, who had placed great expectations on Dong Zhuo, could no longer hold back? Tuoba Chi-yun finally said, General Dong, I have been to the northwest camp on the Longyan Plain. Dong Zhuo grunted in acknowledgement. When she thought of the so-called northwest camp, Yeluyuhu suddenly felt somewhat disgusted. What camp? It was just a place to pile up sick and dead bodies. Pile up. The strength that the Southern Dynasty had accumulated over the past 20 years was all focused on offense, especially on siege materials. Otherwise, they would not have been able to pull out nearly 1,000 catapults of various sizes in one go. However, Beimang had never been good at treating the wounded on the battlefield. Under the scorching sun, Yeluyuhu, clad in a gorgeous golden armor, was already dripping with sweat. She had a natural yearning for war, yearning for the thrill of exchanging lives on horseback, yearning for the piercing feeling of an arrow piercing through the enemy's skull. Yeluyuhu was used to seeing dead people, but even someone as determined as her almost couldn't help but vomit when she arrived at the northwest barracks. Carts after carts of corpses were dragged down from the battlefield and thrown into large pits that had been dug. Wounded soldiers lay not far from the pits, wailing in pain. Many of the wounded soldiers, who had been badly mutilated by the city defense equipment, begged for a quick death. At the time, Tuoba Chi-yun was standing at the edge of a new pit with 700 or 800 corpses piled on top of it. She asked the soldier in charge of sprinkling the lime for a basin. Yilu Yuhu, with a thick cotton cloth covering her mouth and nose, watched as the spring basin expressionlessly sprinkled out handfuls of lime. She suddenly realized that she, who had been more cold-hearted than the men of the grassland since she was a child, actually felt sad for the first time after seeing this scene. Tuoba Chi-yun's thoughts jumped around quickly. She changed the topic and said slowly, General Dong was anxious when fighting Biyao, but he slowed down when fighting Hudu. The resilience and fighting habits of the nomads made Baimang's low need for food far exceed the imagination of the Central Plains cavalry. At least Baimang still did not lack food. However, if they could send their troops down south during the autumn season, Baimang would be able to handle the situation more easily in a stalemate. Tuoba Chi-yun didn't want to speak too much belated advice. Besides, there was a reason why Dong Zhuo and the Taiping Order wanted to go down south at the beginning of spring. What Tuoba Chi-yun really wanted to say was the second half of the sentence. If Dong Zhuo's eastern front had attacked the city without thinking of the consequences and took Hudu in one go, the current situation would not be so difficult to get off. This was not Tuoba Chi-yun criticizing Dong Zhuo for not putting in effort when fighting Hudu. In fact, there was nothing wrong with Dong Zhuo's deployment. However, since Dong Zhuo was the king of the southern courtyard and the commander-in-chief of the million-strong army, he should have done more. Dong Zhuo nodded and said, At first, I suspected that other than the thousands of elite cavalry reported by our spies, there was another group of armored cavalry hidden in Tiger Head City. For example, the 6,000 iron Buddhas that were later given to the Qidong kingdom. I even suspected that at least one of the two groups of Northern Liang's heavy cavalry, which totaled about 9,000 people, was hidden in Tiger Head City. Because I felt that since Chu Lushan dared to place the Huayang Pass behind Hudu, he must have wanted to fight me head-on. He wanted to fight with me south of Hudu and north of Liuya and Fuling in a big battle where both light and heavy cavalry would appear. Dong Zhuo said in a deep voice, Until that ambush where everyone had their own schemes, I first used 4,000 cavalry at Yaslope as bait. As expected, the Fuling army's commander-in-chief Wei Liang was greedy for merit and advanced prematurely. His formation was disrupted by the 8,000 cavalry. If it was not for that Beiliang's junior commander-in-chief Wei Liang who ruined things at Kifulong Pass and was too brave to help the Fuling cavalry break through, the Beiliang's ambush should have entered the battlefield on time. My Dong family cavalry would also have moved. In the end, on that battlefield, I could lure out Fuling and Liuya, the two commanders-in-chief Huayang Pass, and even the Huda city cavalry. In this way, it would have become a situation where both sides' cavalry swapped places. Even if I, Dong Zhuo, suffered more losses, as long as I could destroy the mobility of the Beiliang cavalry's defensive line south of Huda city, it wouldn't be a problem whether Huda city was conquered or not. Dong Zhuo said self-deprecatingly, Perhaps many people in the Beiliang Protectorate are cursing that junior commander-in-chief of Kifulong Pass for using his strength in the wrong place. But in reality, Liang Zhou was lucky enough to escape a calamity. A single Huda city isn't scary. What's scary is the nimble cavalry behind it that doesn't seek to kill the enemy, only to restrain them. Right now, I, Dong Zhuo, am not sure if I'm thinking too much, or if Chu Lushan's luck is good, or if he's actually thinking more than I am. Yilu Yuhu frowned and said, Can't we just press forward with all our forces and attack Fuling and Liuya together? In any case, we have the absolute advantage in terms of military strength. It would be a waste not to fight. Dong Zhuo dismissed it with a laugh and didn't explain anything. Tuoba Chi-yun shook his head and said, It's not that we can't stake it all in one throw, but there's not much point. Just as Tuoba Chi-yun was about to explain the specifics to Yilu Yuhu, Dong Zhuo rode along the edge of the infantry formation toward a group of dusty carriages. When the 1,000-man commander in charge of supervising his subordinates moving the corpses saw the king of the southern courtyard, he quickly dismounted and reported the battle situation to Dong Zhuo. It turned out that these corpses had all been dragged out from the tunnels leading into the city. Baimang's catapult attacks had intervals in between, but this unpresentable method of attacking the city had never stopped. However, there were still no obvious results. Apart from a group of 500 soldiers who entered Tiger Head City at the beginning, but they were quickly intercepted and killed by the armored city guards, the rest died in the narrow paths of the tunnels or were easily killed by those waiting for rabbits to appear at the cave entrances. It was reported that City Guard General Lu Jinu had long made preparations. He had dug out more than 10 holes that were 3 zhang deep in various strategic locations within the city beforehand, allowing the soldiers with sharp ears to stay within. As long as Beimang's cave masters and armored soldiers made any movements within several hundred or even 1,000 steps, they would be able to immediately seize the opportunity. Afterwards, whether it was digging holes horizontally to set up an ambush or using windmills to fan the smoke and lime, all of this was easy. That 1,000-man commander had only taken up this post because he lost an arm in the formation charging and attached army. After the single-armed man finished reporting the general battle situation and death toll, his eyes became slightly red. After lowering his head, he said quietly, "Great General, there have been 16 tunnels in total. Including this wave, the number of our brothers who have died underground has already reached 5,000. Is it worth it? To be able to die on top of Tiger Head City's city walls is also good." Dong Zhuo said calmly, "You all should head to the northwest camp." The single-armed 1,000-man commander raised his remaining arm to wipe his eyes. After getting on his horse, he led the carriages piled with corpses into the distance. Chapter 1559. Yilu Yuhu was inexplicably enraged. He took a deep breath and asked the king of the southern courtyard, when Biyao attacked Qingzhou and Xiangfan City, they were experts at digging tunnels. Since they know how to attack, they're no newbies in defense. Moreover, the thousands of Biyao cavalry in the city have clearly been on the city walls. Even if a few hundred men make it to the surface alive, what can they do? Dong Zhuo smiled, as if he didn't want to mention the 5,000 dead soldiers who didn't make any contributions. He said, 2 days ago, there was a group of cavalry in the city, and they were forced to climb up the city wall to defend it. They were much stronger when they dismounted from their horses than when they were exhausted. 2 of my Kiliarchs had already led their men to the top of the city wall. They were only 400 steps away from each other, and they almost gained a foothold on the city wall. Dong Zhuo pressed his thumb and forefinger together. Just a little bit. Tuoba Tianyun said helplessly, this little bit of opportunity was obtained by General Dong's order that every Kiliarchs must suffer 400 casualties before they can retreat. This is a huge price to pay. Dong Zhuo laughed. It's not even half over yet. Yilu Yuhu asked rudely, almost interrogatively, dare I ask General, how many grassland men have died to the blades of our own people? Dong Zhuo gave it some serious thought before replying, there are 3 Kiliarchs and many centurions. Including the ordinary soldiers, there are 2,700 of them as of yesterday if I'm not mistaken. Yilu Yuhu said angrily, aren't you afraid of triggering a mutiny? Dong Zhuo asked in return, you want a mutiny after killing so many cowardly trash? Yilu Yuhu sneered. Indeed, General, you have 100,000 Dong family private soldiers who haven't suffered any casualties. You're also a general who commands troops with divine precision. You can definitely nip the bud in the bud. Tuoba Tianyun said, say no more. Yilu Yuhu wanted to say something but hesitated. Seeing Chun Jemo's displeased expression, she finally decided not to provoke this king of the southern courtyard who didn't live up to his name. The 2 riders bid farewell to Dong Zhuo and left. Yilu Yue turned his head to look at the sturdy figure who had stopped his horse. He said in a low voice, this fatty, so this is how he leads his troops. As an official, he is really capable. The war has already reached this point, yet he still doesn't forget to follow someone's wishes and beat down the forces of the grasslands little by little in front of Tiger Head City. A chilly arch had consumed the direct troops brought from the tribe, but where would the rest of the troops come from under the rapid rotation? Either they were replenished from the southern dynasty's military towns and mixed with sand, or they were simply mixed up with the remnants of the 2 armies. Yilu Yuhu's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, it's all because of the people of the central plains of the southern dynasties. The Zhao clan of Liang used the Guangling Road to take back military power from the local vassals and generals. We're not bad either. The grassland people are all hurt here. Even if we break through Biyao and enter the Central Plains in the future, how many of our own people will be left? Tuoba Tianyun laughed. Complaining too much will cause your intestines to break. Yilu Yue glared at him. You can still laugh? Do you think your Tuoba surname can stay out of this? Tuoba Tianyun shook his head and smiled without saying anything. The fat man who stood alone in the crow's cage looked at Tiger's Head City. In his field of vision, the attacking infantry was like an unending tide, and then the tide surged up the city walls, creating waves that spread upwards. He waved his hand to call over a young strategist who was accompanying him. He said, "Pass down the order. First, stop digging the tunnel from today onwards. Second, increase the intensity of the attack. During the day, more than half of the infantry will be killed. During the night, the attack will not be based on casualties. Each Chiliarch only needs to attack Tiger Head City for 2 hours. Third, send a message to the western capital. In the entire southern dynasties, no matter their surname, as long as the family is on the ranking list, they must take out all the wine in their cellars to treat the wounds of the Eastern Front Army. Remember, this is all the wine of all the families of the southern dynasties. If someone secretly hides a jar, once exposed, the family's ranking will be downgraded from first to second, and so on. Fourth, tonight I want to summon all the generals and Chiliarchs on the Eastern Front who are not on the battlefield." The strategist quickly left to pass down the order. Dong Zhuo said in a low voice, "Yelu Chukai." A burly officer who was temporarily acting as the leader of the Crow's pen hurriedly urged his horse closer. This time, this general who was both a member of the Beimang imperial tent and the brother-in-law of the great king of the southern courtyard did not dare to smile. As long as his brother-in-law called out his real name, it meant that something big was about to happen. Yilu Chutsai's sister was Dong Zhuo's eldest daughter-in-law. They both had the surname Yilu, but compared to Yilu Yuhui, she was much more noble. However, compared to Yilu Yuhui, who was said to have gone to the central plains of Liang to do nothing, the brother and sister were further away from the throne. Yilu Chukai had never had such an extravagant wish. Since he was young, he wanted to be a pure general who galloped on the battlefield. After having a brother-in-law like Dong Zhuo, who was very much to his liking, he had been like a fish in water in the Dong army. However, in this southern expedition to Biyao, his brother-in-law, who had always been easy to talk to, refused to let him be the vanguard. This made Yilu Chukai feel very hurt. Even when the Dong army went to Liuzhou not long ago, he had nothing to do with it. During this time, Yilu Chukai was as bitter as a widow. Dong Zhuo glanced at his brother-in-law and smiled. "I'll give you a job, but it's a bit far. Do you want to take it?" Yilu Chukai asked carefully, "Will I get any military merits?" Dong Zhuo said, "Not necessarily." Yilu Chukai said decisively, "Then I won't go." Dong Zhuo smiled. "It's fine if you don't go. You still have a chance to attack the city tomorrow. I'll just switch people." Yilu Chukai was confused. "Attack the city?" Dong Zhuo nodded. "The Dong clan has 12,000 soldiers. I'll leave them all to you. Tomorrow, we'll start attacking Huda city." Yilu Chutsai's mouth was wide open in shock. With his figure, it was really a big mouth. Compared to his sister's beauty, it was really a far cry. It really didn't look like they were born from the same parents. Yilu Chutsai's eyes suddenly burned. He did not call Dong Zhuo brother-in-law, but respectfully called him great general. This general was born in the cavalry. "If you want me to dismount and attack a city, forget it. This general has decided. I'll take the first job." Dong Zhuo stared at him and said calmly, "I'll leave the 80,000 Dong clan cavalry to you. Rush out of the gourd mouth as fast as you can. Although I've arranged for people to keep an eye on that place, I'm still worried. Also, before you leave, write a will. If you die, I'll have something to say to your sister." Yilu Chukai, who was famous for his playfulness in Beimang, grinned. He clenched his fist and pounded his chest. "Great general, if This general doesn't come back and have no chance to see great general and my sister's children. I'll tell them in the future that their uncle's only regret is that he didn't let them ride on his neck to play. Dong Zhuo hesitated. If it's the same with or without you at the gourd mouth, don't force yourself. Since you like children, get a wife and have them yourself. Yilu Chukai nodded and left on his horse. Dong Zhuo remained motionless. No one could hear this fatty muttering to himself. He was repeating a number, 38, 38, in Tiger Head City. The few towering watchtowers near the north of the city had become the main targets of the northern Mang's catapults. Meanwhile, the building where the main general Lu Jinu was located was even further back, so the threat posed by the catapults wasn't fatal. On the other hand, those northern Mang master archers who participated in the siege and were able to get close to the top of the city were all proud of themselves for being able to shoot down this building with their arrows. Even though this wouldn't be counted into their military exploits, they would still be treated as heroes after retreating from the battlefield. Lu Jinu stood beside the table with the map of Tiger Head City. The map had marked all kinds of details of the battlefield, such as the degree of damage to the city wall, the area where the ballistae were missing, and the dangerous battlements that had been hastily built several times, etc. Lu Jinu stared at the northeast area of the city defense map. After the ballistae were destroyed in this area, Beimang didn't give up on attacking the city from the north. They focused on increasing the density and thickness of their attacks in this area. A large number of siege weapons began to move from the northwest to the northeast. A city patrol officer walked into the building with large strides, laughing loudly as he said, "General, these northern Mang barbarians really don't have a good memory. Another 700 or so rats died today, a small half of them suffocated to death. When this general brought people down, they were all slaughtered without much effort. Same as before, that tunnel has been completely filled up. In addition, there will be 2 acupoint masters and a cavalry troop watching the nearby area day and night." Lu Jinu nodded. He raised his head and asked, "Have you used up all the lightning bolts hanging outside the watchtowers?" Lightning bolts were a special type of soft curtain used by the Central Plains to deal with siege. They were tightly woven from coarse hemp and covered with mud to prevent fire. They were very effective against catapults and rockets. Although Tiger Head City's city wall was abnormally sturdy, if there weren't a large number of lightning bolts to reduce the impact of the flying rocks, Tiger Head City wouldn't be as easy to repair as it was now. A deputy general said helplessly, "That's right. I didn't expect these barbarians to be able to get so many catapults. Fortunately, General, you've already made preparations. Otherwise, it would really be dangerous. Besides, we're running out of water bags. Not only the city gate, but all the sections of the city wall are also having a headache. There's no problem with the water source. It's just that the water bags made from the fur and internal organs of cattle and horses can't keep up. Those barbarians are risking their lives to pour oil on the top of the city wall and fire arrows like a rain of fire. They're really crazy. Fortunately, our mud-stained brooms to deal with fire attacks can be used repeatedly." Lu Jinu, who hadn't slept much for 2 days and 2 nights, picked up an arrow from the table and handed it to a captain beside him. "All of you, look carefully." Chapter 1560. Lu Jinu passed the arrow around and said, "In the past, Beimang used this kind of arrow when they attacked the city, but it wasn't on a large scale. They only started to appear in large numbers in the past 2 days. Previously, half of the arrows matched the current configuration of Beimang's elite cavalry. They used elongated arrowheads to penetrate Beiliang's armor. However, the other half were mixed with old-fashioned bronze arrows and iron arrows from the Dafeng dynasty. They were all flat and rectangular. Now, it's different. They're more refined and finely divided. That's why even all arrows and iron spine arrows have appeared." Lu Jinu put down the arrow. "The reason why I say this is because I think of the recent attacks by Beimang. I dare say that Beimang is taking a breather. It's a bit like a fight between masters in Jianghu. Before Beimang launches the next wave of attacks, this will be an opportunity for us. Of course, it could also be a trap. But no matter what, we should give it a try. That's why I've purposely let the cavalry go up to the city wall to remedy the situation." While giving the soldiers a breather, we also want our cavalry to take the initiative to leave the city. One of the captains who was responsible for guarding the city gate and who had been shot in the head by Beimang barbarians 2 days ago asked, "Do we need the soldiers on the city wall to cooperate and fight more fiercely?" Lu Jina shook his head and said, "No need. We don't want to be superfluous." Lu Jinu slowly closed his eyes. It wasn't clear if he was so tired that he had to rest for a while, or if he was looking for an opportunity in his mind. Lu Jinu suddenly opened his eyes. He pressed his fists on the table and stared at the 2 captains who were eager to give it a try. Beimang is responsible for protecting the cavalry on the 2 wings of the infantry. They've been watching the show for a long time and have slacked off. Tonight, 2,000 cavalry will be placed behind the north gate. After they leave the city, they'll charge at will. 1,000 cavalry from the east and west gates will attack the flanks. Remember, there is only an hour. I will only give the 3 cavalry armies an hour at most. No matter how many northern Mang soldiers you kill or injure, you must immediately return. You must not linger in battle without retreating. An hour later, my Tiger-Head city will once again open its gates. Lu Jinu suddenly called out to the 2 captains who had left. Let me tell you in advance that Beimang might not even give us a chance to reopen Huda's city. A tall, white-haired captain nodded and said, "Understood." The 2 captains who were a generation apart walked out of the room. Of course, the young captain looked behind him. Then he said to the old captain, "Old, what do you want to say? Do you really want to make things clear?" The captain stopped the captain of the captains of the captains. Of the captains. And song, of the song of the song of beef of Beimang, of song of Beemoff song, beat captains captain, of captains where captains was a s's. T captains captains of years, of captain. T-tes, s. Of beasts. Of bean. Of course. The old man kicked the guy's butt and scolded softly, "Get back here. And let me finish." When Captain Song turned around again, the captain pointed to the north and said softly, "I only have a son and a daughter. My son died in Beimang in the first year of Yonghui. My son-in-law, who was also A's captain, died 8 years ago outside the Liangzhou Pass. Fortunately, I have grandchildren. The He family's bloodline hasn't been cut off. But it's not a good feeling to die before your own." The captain smiled. "I know you fought with my son-in-law in the past. You also complained that I chose him as my son-in-law and not you. That's why you've been fighting with me all these years in Huda City. With my temper, if it was 30 years ago, I would have beaten you to a pulp." The captain rolled his eyes and muttered, "Can't beat me." The old man couldn't be bothered to argue with this lad. He sighed with emotion and said, "Not counting the years of fighting in the Central Plains, I've been living in northern Liang for almost 20 years. I have a home and I live a peaceful life. Even if my family members die, the children can still wear mourning clothes. It's not like the chaotic times when I was young. Living is more difficult than dying. I occasionally return to my hometown and watch the children practice writing every day. They look like they know how to do it. They're even more skilled at holding a brush than I am at holding a spear. I listen to their study outside the study room. The way of life in Bailiang today is really good." The captain patted Captain Song's shoulder. "In such a good world, we'll live as long as we can. As for me, I don't plan to go back no matter if the city gate can be opened a second time tonight. You want me to get off my horse and fight Beimang barbarians at the city gate in the future? I can't kill many of them. It's better to kill more on horseback. Little Song, are you still going to fight with old Biyao to get out of the city?" The captain cupped his fists slowly, but there were many things he couldn't say. The captain laughed and walked away in big strides. In the end, he was kicked in the butt by the guy surnamed Song. The latter ran downstairs like a gust of wind and said, "Old Biyao, if I didn't take your daughter away back then, I swore to kick you in this life. Don't be angry." The old man patted the armor on his back and laughed, "You little bastard. Fortunately, I didn't choose you as my son-in-law back then. Beimang attacked the city day and night. Piles of orderly bonfires burned on the battlefield outside the city. Both Liangmang and Huda city were used to it. At midnight. In Taoist alchemy books, it was regarded as the beginning of Yang, the time of fire. On each of the 3 plazas leading to the 3 gates of Huda city, a cavalry unit began to go into battle. Long spears hung from their saddles, cold sabers hung from their waists, and crossbows were not carried. The old general in the north stretched out his hand and grasped the long spear that he had snatched from a West Chu general of the West Wall. He smiled and said, "Old man, after taking my surname, you haven't been wronged, have you?" When the creaking sound of the gates slowly opening was heard, the captain suddenly squeezed his horse's belly and began to charge. In order to cooperate with the 3 cavalry units, especially the cavalry in the north, and not to reveal any signs prematurely, a rain of arrows at the north gate was aimed at the Beimang barbarians near the city gate. Therefore, when the Beimang infantry were caught off guard and realized that the city gate had opened on its own, they were stunned for a moment. Even the scouts responsible for supervising the battle and patrolling hundreds of steps behind the city gate didn't immediately come back to their senses. When they saw the cavalry rushing out of the gate with their own eyes, the scouts were a little dumbfounded. But soon, someone turned his horse around and whipped it madly, galloping through a gap that was deliberately left open by the 3 infantry formations. When they turned around to pass on this urgent military news, the Beimang soldiers near the city gate had their heads smashed by the cavalry spear or were directly sent flying by the impact of the spear. When the cavalry faced the infantry that didn't set up a formation, killing them was actually like cutting wheat with a knife. If it were a frontal clash between fully armored cavalry, both sides could borrow the great inertia of the warhorse's charge to cause great damage to the spear and the rider's arm. But now? The captain, who couldn't be more familiar with fighting on the battlefield, had been paying attention to his breathing since the very beginning. He definitely wasn't like a rash youth who wanted nothing more than to kill dozens of enemies in one breath. The captain also didn't overly pursue the speed of the warhorse's charge. As the leaders of a cone-shaped cavalry unit, they should all be like this. Otherwise, they would ruin the entire cavalry unit's pace and even cause the cavalry formation to break apart. Although this kind of situation was negligible in terms of cavalry battle steps, the old man was a true captain of Liang province's border cavalry. He had fought on horseback for most of his life, so it was natural for him to act this way. The 1,000-man Beimang barbarians on the right side of the city gate were in the midst of climbing the city walls. The 1,000-man men behind them hadn't yet come forward to take turns attacking the city. On the left side, 2 Kiliarchs were in the midst of exchanging commands. The old captain said to his deputy, "Lead 1,000 men and break through the formation. You go around the city." The 2,000-man cavalry quickly split up to the left and right, like a stream slipping away after meeting a rock. The old man led 1,000 men straight for the 1,000-man Beimang army that was still intact. The 6 or 7 Beimang soldiers in leather armor saw that they couldn't escape. They clenched their teeth and brandished their blades as they charged forward. The old captain directly charged past, the tip of his spear slanted slightly downwards, aiming at the neck of a Beimang soldier. The great penetrating force directly knocked this soldier who was raising his blade high off the ground. The moment the spear was about to pierce the enemy's neck, the old man's hands imperceptibly let go of the spear. In the next moment, he quickly grabbed the spear shaft again. The position he grabbed only shifted by less than an inch. However, it was precisely this short inch of distance created by letting go of the spear that allowed the old man to remove 50 to 60% of the resistance brought about by the spear's charge. Chapter 1561. The old man lightly pulled his spear back, pulling out the spearhead from the neck of the corpse and continuing to charge forward. This was the precious experience the elder had accumulated as a member of the Su family's cavalry when he was young, galloping through the great lands of the Central Plains. The younger generation of Northern Liang cavalry knew this trick, but normally, they wouldn't use it. After all, Northern Mang was also a cavalry army, so they didn't need to use this type of flashy but useless trick. However, it was very meaningful right now. In this type of situation where a small number of cavalry faced a large number of infantry, the longer the spear left their hands, the more enemies they would kill. When those 6 or 7 Northern Mang soldiers were rushed through, they instantly died. The soldiers on the two sides who were further away were also unable to escape death after the 1,000 cavalry quickly spread out. The most tragic one was that after dodging the spear of the 1st Cavalry, he was killed on the spot by the 2nd Cavalry of Tiger Head City. In the eyes of the 1,000 infantry not far away, they saw the cone-shaped cavalry charge out of the city in a few blinks of an eye. They had already formed a line of 100 cavalry. The Beimang lieutenant hollered, "Front row, raise your shields. Archers, get ready." The old lieutenant burst out into laughter. "Without a spear barricade formation and without heavy armor, you want to block the charge of my Beiyang cavalry with just 2 to 3 rows of scattered shield soldiers? I, He Lianshan, am a Beiyang soldier who has even charged past West Chu's great halberd soldiers. Didn't you all put in a lot of effort in sieging the city? Today, my Tiger Head City cavalry will teach you all a lesson." When he suddenly increased his speed. First, this row of elite Beiyang cavalry used the corners of their eyes to increase their speed. Very quickly, they continued to maintain a perfectly straight line. The cavalry behind this row did the same. The 1,000 cavalry were all the same. This was the Beiyang cavalry. The old lieutenant casually brushed aside an arrow that was flying towards his face. As for the one that was flying towards his shoulder armor, he did not even bother about it. The moment the cavalry touched the arrow, the heavens and earth seemed to have stopped. One by one, the Beiyang horses jumped high into the air. Above that line, above the heads of the Beimang soldiers who were kneeling and raising their shields, it was a spectacular sight. When the horses' hooves finally landed on the ground, it was time for the dead. A Tiger Head City lieutenant with astonishing physical strength fiercely stabbed his spear into the chest of a Beimang archer in the back row. He dragged the corpse, which was bleeding profusely, and slid backwards. The spearhead that pierced through the chest smashed into the abdomen of a second Beimang soldier behind him. The cavalry lieutenant suddenly pushed his spear and then let go. The moment the warhorse charged between the two corpses, the lieutenant bent down and grabbed the spearhead tightly. He pulled it out of the corpse in one breath. As if their hearts were connected, the Beiyang warhorse suddenly exploded with a shocking second charge. It fiercely knocked away the third Beimang barbarian who was trying to chop at his master's arm. The 1,000-man infantry formation, which only had a small number of shield soldiers, a certain number of archers, and a large number of city-climbing swordsmen, did not have any thickness to speak of. The 1,000-man and 1,000-horse charged through. The 900 cavalry from Tiger Head City did not stop at all. They did not care about the 1,000 Beimang men who were covered in dead and injured on the ground. They continued to rush towards the second phalanx that was 1,000 steps away from the first phalanx. Unlike the first phalanx, the archers in the second phalanx had more opportunities to shoot. The Chiliarch had even hurriedly borrowed nearly 100 shield men from the rear, and mixed in with a dozen or so spears that weren't very useful. It was really hard for this Chiliarch who had no choice but to make a last-minute effort. But further away, there was already a cavalry unit on the flanks that had begun to reinforce the infantry through the gaps. The old lieutenant who had the arrow nailed into his shoulder began to slow down his horse, whether intentionally or not. He breathed lightly with the rise and fall of the horse's back. The old man's gaze passed through the second infantry formation and looked even further away. Out of the corner of his eye, he paid attention to the movements on his left and right. The cavalry unit on the Beimang's right flank that was fighting the fire from afar numbered about 2,000. The old lieutenant shouted loudly, "Break through the left half of the infantry formation in front, and then just charge to the left. Let that Beimang cavalry unit eat dust behind us." When they were less than 500 paces away, the cavalry began to accelerate their charge. The front line began to shift to the left. After several waves of dense arrow rain, half of the 700 Tiger Head City cavalry successfully charged to the left. This time, they ruthlessly crashed into the third formation without holding back. After this collision, apart from the 50 to 60 cavalrymen who were still holding spears, this cavalry unit that seemed to have entered a no-man's land began to switch to Beiyang sabers. But this time, they abandoned their spears and switched to sabers. The damage inflicted on this Beimang infantry formation was even more exaggerated than when the Beiyang cavalry crashed into the second infantry formation. Most of those spears pierced into the chests of the Beimang infantry. The Liangzhou cavalry had an iron law. If the spears that left their hands before switching to sabers couldn't kill the enemy, they would be counted as having done nothing after the battle. In the firelight of the late night, this large expanse of dazzling snow-white sabers was particularly eye-catching. Even the commanding general Lu Jinu, who was far away on top of a tall building in Tiger Head City, could see everything clearly. This cavalry unit, including Lieutenant He Lianshan, had no intention of returning to Tiger Head City alive. Lu Jinu knew this very well. At this moment, Lu Jinu and the other lieutenants in the building were all standing in front of the railing. Lu Jinu didn't show any grief on his face. He only said in his heart, "Rest in peace. When we return, let's find the great general underground for a drink." Lu Jinu turned around and limped back into the building. He remembered that time when the young vassal king, who was covered in blood, led 20 or so Wu family swordsmen back to Tiger Head City. The young man casually asked Lu Jinu if the Central Plains couldn't be defended without Biyao. Lu Jinu told the young man that the answer was no. In a short 20 years, the Central Plains was still unyielding. When the day came when there was no way to retreat, many people would realize that they could also face death without hesitation. Just like our Biyao. In the end, Lu Jinu added with a smile, however, the Central Plains outside of Biyao can be unafraid of death, but if they want to kill hundreds of thousands or even 1 million barbarians like our Biyao, they can forget about it. At that time, Lu Jinu saw the young man trying to hold back his laughter. Lu Jinu suddenly turned around and ran out of the building. A tall but meticulous officer immediately grabbed the Tiger Head City general and said angrily, "General, we've already given a military order to His Highness. Tiger Head City has to be defended for at least 3 months. That's the minimum. What's wrong? General, you want to quit? Isn't it easy to die? Don't talk about going out of the city to kill the enemy like Officer He. General, you just need to stand on the city wall and you'll definitely come back in 2 hours." Lu Jinu said unhappily, "I'm going to sleep." The tall officer was puzzled. Really? Several officers who were obviously worried about Lu Jinu said in unison, "I'll send you off, General." Lu Jinu thought about it and broke free from the tall officer's hands. "Forget it, I'm not sleepy anymore. Come, let's quickly discuss how to bring back the other cavalry units that went out of the city." Judging from the movements outside the city, the Beimang cavalry is trying to set up a net. It's faster than we expected. We have to think of a way in 15 minutes. If there's no other way, we should let them return to the city immediately. We can't wait until the first hour. The tall lieutenant couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Lu Jinu turned around but didn't stop walking. "Say that again?" The tall officer immediately shut his mouth. Lu Jinu stared at him. "Idiot." The tall officer turned around and curled his lips. "Do you think I'm an idiot? In any case, I was brought out by you." "Idiot," Lu Jinu suddenly stopped and said in a deep voice, "That's not right. Bring me the map of the entire Liangmang border." When the map was spread out on the table, Lu Jinu fell into deep thought. The people in the building didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Lu Jinu's gaze quickly moved around the borders of the 3 provinces. In the end, he narrowed his eyes and stared back at Tiger Head City. He slowly said, "Right now, Beimang's true goal isn't to eat up the Longxiang army in Lu province. It's not to take down Shaoguang City in Yuzhou, and it's not to take down our Tiger Head City." Everyone was puzzled. Could it be Lingzhou? But this was too preposterous. Lu Jinu extended a finger and pointed at a military town. "It's Huayang Pass behind Tiger Head City. To be more precise, it's the entire Liangzhou behind Protector General Chu Lushan." Someone asked, "But as long as Tiger Head City is still there, Huayang Pass is a dangerous pass that can be attacked and defended. On the surface, there are several Beiyang's most elite cavalry that can provide support at any time. Although we just received a secret report that these cavalry troops are already, the Beimang barbarians definitely don't know the whereabouts of the 20,000 people. Under these circumstances, what can Beimang use to attack Huayang Pass? Someone said, "It doesn't matter if Lu province is lost or not. As long as the Longxiang army can preserve half of its strength, with the addition of Yozhou's Calabash Pass, we can definitely form an encirclement. Then, if we can defend Tiger Head City for 3 months, Beiliang can even counterattack the 2 provinces of Beimang." Lu Jinu was silent. Chapter 1562. When that sword flew from thousands of miles away to Lu Xia town, before Mr. White Lotus had revealed the secret of heaven, Liuzhou was already on the verge of war. 3 Liuzhou officials, 2 civil and 1 military, walked on top of the city wall. Their position was closer to the side of the parapet wall, which was slightly shorter than the outer walls. Outside the city, small groups of Beimang cavalry constantly roared past. There were at least 30 to 200 of them. Occasionally, they would ride and shoot, but they did not cause any damage to the soldiers defending the city. In fact, it was like they were here to enjoy the scenery, filled with a strong sense of provocation. The only old man among the 3 of them was wearing the official uniform of a 3rd-rank official, embroidered with peacock patches. Just now, a few sharp arrows flew over the old man's head. The old man smiled and said, "Evil guests are at the door. You like to throw shoes at people's doors so much. If I get the chance." At this point, the old man paused. He turned his head and smiled at the young man wearing the military robe. "General Ko, will I have such a chance?" The self-proclaimed Dragon King of the West, Kai Junshin, had been sent by the king of Beiliang to Lingzhou's Huangnam County to be the governor of the county. He and his wife, Yu Ruru, lived happily together. The Dragon King's residence in Qingsang City had been changed to the residence of the governor of Liuzhou. This old man was the highest-ranking civil official in Liuzhou, the governor Yang Guangdou. The civil official beside him was the Gangnam-do scholar Chen Shiliang, who had taken root in Liuzhou and was unwilling to leave. When Qingsang City realized that Lu Gui's army intended to attack the city, the governor's residents had an intense argument that lasted through the night. As for whether to defend or to retreat, it evolved into 2 sharply opposing camps. The older officials of Liuzhou all advocated that as long as the Green Hills were there would be no need to worry about firewood. They might as well give up on Qingsang City and head to Linyao military town under the escort of the Longxiang army. As long as they were still alive, there would not be any problems with the military and political operations of Liuzhou. As for the younger generation of officials, regardless of whether they were from a general family or scholars from the Central Plains, they all strongly requested to defend Qingsang City to the death, fighting for the Longxiang army to have the best opportunity to battle Dinglu province. Originally, as long as the 2 of them reached an agreement, this quarrel would not become more and more intense. However, the problem was that the experienced and prudent provincial governor Yang Guangdou unexpectedly supported defending the city to the end. On the other hand, Chen Shiliang, whose prestige among the refugees of Liuzhou was even greater than that of the young vassal king, was the complete opposite. He suggested moving the provincial governor's residence to Linyao. As a result, the 2 sides were in a deadlock. Then, the newly appointed Lu province general entered Azure City at this moment. Ko Jianghuai stretched out his hand and gently pressed it against the rough female wall. He did not make any big statements, nor did he pat his chest and promise anything to the old provincial governor. The ancient military town under his feet was used by the Great Feng dynasty to control the vast western regions. As the number 1 military town in Liuzhou, which was closest to Liangzhou, this little city wall was just a decoration. Even though it had been urgently reinforced after being incorporated into Beiliang's territory, it still made Ko Jianghuai, who was used to seeing the majestic cities of the Central Plains, find it laughable. This young Liuzhou general who had rushed here with several hundred cavalry was temporarily carrying out his duties in a residence near the provincial governor's residence. However, in the vast Liuzhou that was comparable to the entire old Beiliang road, there were only a handful of places that Ko Jianghuai could mobilize. For example, the current most intimidating military force in Liuzhou, the 30,000 Longxiang army, was directly under the jurisdiction of the Protectorate General. The main general, Su Longxiang, and his 2 deputies, Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, were not people that he could order around. If Ko Jianghuai dared to interfere with the specific promotions of the Longxiang army, the Liuzhou general's position as general of Liuzhou could probably be counted on one hand. From start to finish, Ko Jianghuai did not recognize a single one of the generals and soldiers of Linyao and Fengxiang. Right now, he only had the 4,000 Qingsang army soldiers in Azure City and the 10,000 or so refugees that Chen Shiliang had gathered at his disposal. Even though they were not bad in individual combat and barely passable in defending a city, when placed on a large-scale battlefield, Ko Jianghuai did not know what else they could do other than give military merit to Lu Gui. Therefore, as a general of Liuzhou who was determined to achieve great things in the western regions, he was even worse off than a housewife who could not cook without rice. Right now, he did not even have a decent stove. Ko Jianghuai walked near the outer wall and looked at a group of Beimang cavalry galloping away in the dust. He said softly, "The provincial governor wants to defend to the death because he feels that if he retreats, Liuzhou will go from being balanced to being in a disadvantageous position where he will have no initiative at all. A slight move in one part will affect the entire situation, causing a large hole to be torn in the connection between Liuzhou and Liangzhou. Beimang's Nanchao military town and Dongzhua's central line will be able to send an endless stream of troops here and thus affect the entire layout of Liangzhou. Mr. Chen wants to retreat because he is worried that the Longxiang army will fall into a trap and suffer great losses in the battle with Lu Gui's army outside Qingsang City. Once the Longxiang army loses the ability to pin down Beimang's western line army." Chen Shiliang rudely interrupted Ko Jianghuai. "Although I can't say that I am familiar with military affairs, I know that Lu Gui was able to endure until now because he definitely wants to fight a decisive battle. Qingsang City is the bait. I can even be sure that when Lu Gui's army attacks Qingsang City, they will not be too swift and violent at first. They will only bait and force the Longxiang army to increase their forces bit by bit until all 30,000 of the Longxiang army is trapped in a quagmire. Moreover, I am not advocating for Qingsang City to be abandoned, but rather for the provincial governor's officials to retreat to Linyao military town. Qingsang City will still be defended to the end by me and those 14,000 soldiers. This way, the Longxiang army will be able to attack and retreat, and will not be trapped in a quagmire." The current Chen Shiliang's skin was tanned, and he no longer had the elegance of the weak scholar from Baogua Temple. To put it simply, he used to be a handsome scholar who could have caught the eye of a vixen in an ancient temple. Now, even if there were vixens in the world, they would not be willing to pay attention to a scholar with calloused hands who toiled all day. Yang Guangdou, who had been filled with anger for the past 2 days, coldly snorted. "Not just me, but almost the entire Liang knows that in the king of Beiliang's heart, you, Chen Shiliang, are worth the entire provincial governor's mansion." Chen Shiliang frowned. "Then tell the Longxiang army in charge of the escort that I, Chen Shiliang, will also retreat to Linyao military town." Yang Guangdou laughed angrily. "Do you think that Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, who can become generals, are idiots? They are all shrewd. It's fine if I, Yang Guangdou, die, but if you, Chen Shiliang, die in Qingsang City, under the nose of Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, 2 dignified deputy generals of the Longxiang army, do you still want to climb up the ranks of the Beiliang frontier army?" Ko Jianghuai laughed as he interrupted the two's argument. "Those who are good at using troops should first consider defeat before considering victory. This is indeed a valuable advice in military books." In truth, Yang Guangdou was very curious about this young West Chu survivor who had almost become a general. According to Ko Jianghuai's temperament during the series of battles in Guangling, he was not a general who calculated the gains and losses of one place. On the contrary, Ko Jianghuai, whose overall military strength was inferior, was best at large-scale long-distance raids. He always had the advantage in the battlefield, causing the Guangling army that had been beaten into a sieve to be badly battered. Zhao Yi's elite troops were so frightened that they did not even have the courage to go out of the city to help. They were afraid that they would take the initiative to walk into a trap again. After Ko Jianghuai wiped out all of Zhao Yi's main forces on the eastern front, they completely lost contact with the various cities and passes. Yang Guangdou had originally thought that after Ko Jianghuai came to Qingsang City, he would support Chen Shiliang and the other civil officials and advisors in the provincial governor's mansion who were focused on stability. After thinking about it, Yang Guangdou was also worried that the young Ko Jianghuai was anxious to establish his prestige in Liuzhou and wanted to use the Battle of Qingsang City to accumulate military merit for himself. Yang Guangdou hesitated for a moment, then decided not to hide anything. He directly asked, "How confident is General Ko? Can you give this official a hint?" Ko Jianghuai gazed at the Beimang camp in the distance. If Qingsang City is just Qingsang City, and all the variables are only inside and outside Qingsang City, unaffected by outside interference, and the soldiers on both sides are just these people on the surface, then I only have a 10% chance of making the situation in Liuzhou better. Chen Shiliang smiled bitterly and said nothing.